Mount St. Helens is exploding. A massive earthquake is ripping through the area, and a side of the volcano is giving way, crashing down in a deafening landslide. A towering wall of rock, ash, and debris is roaring down the valley, flattening everything in its path. Then comes the blast, a sideways explosion of superheated gas and volcanic debris. Trees are snapping like matchsticks. Homes are vanishing under an ash cloud so thick it blots out the sun. Ashfall rains down on towns hundreds of miles away. People are scrambling for masks and fleeing roads blocked by mud flows called lahars, toxic rivers of volcanic mud. The air fills with dust. Emergency sirens scream. Airports shut down. Hospitals fill with people struggling to breathe. The sky glows eerie orange as lightning storms ignite within the ash cloud overhead. This nightmarish scenario might play out very soon. Mount St. Helens, the famous volcano that blew its top in 1980, is acting a bit restless lately. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, about 350 earthquakes occurred from February to June 2024, and 12 more from September 2024 to January 2025. It was like a bunch of tiny tremors throwing a party underground. Most were so tiny you wouldn't even feel them. But on May 31st, 2024, there was one that hit magnitude 2.0. It's just strong enough that if you were nearby, you might have felt a little rumble. Don't freak out yet though. Over 95% of those quakes were super small with a magnitude less than 1.0. Scientists say this is the biggest burst of shaking since the volcano last erupted in 2008. But the volcano has already done this before. In the late 80s and 90s, it didn't blow up, so more earthquakes didn't mean an eruption is guaranteed. What's really going on might be something called a recharge, which is like the volcano's version of refueling. Magma, the hot melted rock, slowly climbs up from deep underground and fills a big underground magma chamber about 2.5 to 6 miles down. When magma fills this tank, it can cause a lot of stress underground, which makes the ground shake. Right now, there's no other sign that the volcano is about to blow. No weird ground bulges, no extra gas leaks, no heat spikes. The USGS says this level of shaking can go on for years without anything major happening. The alert level is still at normal. But it was very different back on May 18, 1980. Mount St. Helens unleashed one of the most explosive volcanic eruptions in history. And it all started with a huge earthquake, bigger than magnitude 5. But this wasn't just any earthquake. It triggered a massive landslide that ripped off the top of the volcano and tore away the rock and ice that had been holding everything down like a giant lid. Suddenly, the pressure that had been trapping superheated water underground vanished. That water instantly turned to steam, and boom! It burst sideways in a powerful hydrothermal blast. And that was only the beginning. With the top gone, the magma beneath the surface suddenly felt free. It started rising faster, forming bubbles and erupting with terrifying force. For 9 straight hours, Mount St. Helens was sending ash and gas miles into the sky. This giant blast didn't come out of nowhere. The warning signs started months before. On March 16, 1980, tiny earthquakes shook the volcano for the first time in years. By March 27, after hundreds of quakes, Mount St. Helens had its first little steam eruption in over a century. It threw ash and rock into the air and blasted a crater in the icy summit. The volcano kept getting angrier. That crater grew fast and cracks spread across the summit. At the same time, eruptions went from one every hour in March to one every day by April. Then things quieted down for a while. Few people realized that the danger was just beneath the surface. By May, over 10,000 earthquakes had rattled the mountain. The north side of the volcano swelled outward, growing about 450 feet. It was a bulge so huge that it looked like the mountain was about to explode. Scientists knew that magma was pushing up inside, creating a hidden cryptodome, a giant underground pocket of molten rock. And then it blew, shattering the mountain and changing the landscape. On May 18, 1980, exactly at 8:32 a.m., a magnitude 5.1 earthquake hit Mount St. Helens. Without any obvious warning signs, the entire north side of the volcano, the part that had been bulging out for weeks, suddenly broke loose and slid away in a massive landslide. This wasn't just any landslide, it was the largest debris avalanche ever recorded on Earth. Imagine a giant mass of rock, dirt, and trees rushing downhill. It was like dumping 1 million Olympic swimming pools full of stuff into the valley. When the cryptodome got ripped away, the pressure inside the volcano dropped incredibly fast, and this sudden pressure release triggered a huge sideways explosion that tore through the landslide debris. This lateral blast was insanely fast, over 300 miles per hour, and it ripped through everything in its path. Trees were uprooted, forests flattened, and a giant cloud of ash and hot rock shot straight up into the sky. In just 15 minutes, that eruption cloud soared more than 80,000 feet high, way higher than an altitude of 35,000 feet, at which commercial airplanes fly. The blast destroyed an area nearly 19 miles wide from west to east and stretched over 12 miles to the north. In the zone closest to the volcano, almost no trees were left standing. At the blast's far edge, the remaining trees were scorched and burned. A huge area, about 230 square miles, was covered by a thick blanket of hot debris. That sudden release of pressure also affected the volcano's plumbing system, all the way to the underground magma chamber. With less pressure holding it back, the superhot magma suddenly expanded and rushed upward toward the surface. Starting just after noon, fast-moving pyroclastic flows, superhot clouds of gas, ash, and debris, raced out of the crater at speeds between 50 and 80 miles per hour. Those flows formed what we now know as the pumice plain. Scientists say the eruption hit its most powerful stage between 3 and 5 p.m. When the violent phase finally ended, the summit revealed a brand new giant crater shaped like an amphitheater. All day long, the winds carried over 540 million tons of volcanic ash east across the United States. The ash was so thick, it caused total darkness in Spokane, Washington, about 250 miles away. Ash also fell as far as central Montana and could even be spotted hundreds of miles farther east, all the way to the Great Plains, which is over 900 miles from the volcano. The massive ash cloud spread across the entire US in just 3 days and then circled the entire planet in just 15 days. But there was one more problem. The hot gas and rocks were so wild and fast that they melted and ripped up a lot of the snow and ice sitting on top of Mount St. Helens. That sudden rush of melted ice and water mixed with loose dirt and rock, creating fast-moving, dangerous mud flows called lahars. Those lahars tore down the mountain into the river valleys, and the biggest, nastiest lahar hit the North Fork Tidal River. As this muddy, powerful flood barreled downstream, it picked up more dirt and debris, growing bigger and stronger. It smashed through bridges, crushed homes, and finally slammed into the Cowlitz River, reaching its peak size around midnight, about 50 miles away from the volcano. The whole natural disaster took the lives of more than 50 people. After the eruption, the mountain looked like a wasteland, and scientists wanted to see how life could start fresh in such a harsh place. So, their unusual plan was to release a few gophers to dig around the barren soil. Those busy burrowers churned up ash and volcanic debris. digging deep enough to bring buried bacteria and fungi back to the surface. Tiny microbes, especially mycorrhizal fungi, are crucial because they help plants get water and nutrients. It's like hooking roots up to a nutrient highway. Within 6 years, places where gophers worked got covered with over 40,000 plants. At the same time, nearby untouched areas stayed mostly lifeless. The fungi helped plants grow in the soil that was otherwise nutrient-poor and lifeless. Even old-growth forests buried under ash bounced back quickly, thanks to their own fungal networks. But where forests had been clear-cut before the eruption, no such comeback happened. No trees, no fungi, just burned soil even decades later. Humans are at the top of the food chain, but despite this, some creatures cause us a lot of trouble, and we can't do anything about them. Look at these flies with red eyes and blue-green bodies. These are some farmers' worst nightmare in the United States of America. Meet the New World screwworm flies. These little troublemakers have been munching on livestock from Florida to California for centuries, racking up some serious damage to the agricultural scene. To combat these pesky flies, the U.S. Department of Agriculture dropped a whopping 15 million sterile screwworm larvae from helicopters along the Panama-Colombia border. There's even a factory in Panama cranking out these sterile larvae like it's factory-fresh fruit. This action sounds weird, but it makes a lot of sense. The thing is, female flies only get one shot at mating in their entire lives. So if they happen to mate with a sterile dude, that's it. No offspring, ever. This clever trick means healthy screwworms can't reproduce when surrounded by sterile pals, which keeps their numbers in check. But how do we make these male flies sterile in the first place? Simple. A little radiation zap does the trick. You throw a bunch of flies in a lab, give them a quick spin through an X-ray machine, and then drop them from a helicopter into the wild, where their relatives are hanging out. If screwworms start making a comeback, inspectors hop on ATVs and cruise thousands of miles to hunt down any infected animals and stop the spread. There's no magic trick to wipe out these parasites completely, but the game plan is clear. Keep the sterile fly drops coming and stay one step ahead of these pesky little critters. Do you know why it's too dangerous to move animals from one habitat to another? There's a possibility that they won't encounter predators in the new area and will become an invasive species that will provoke an ecological disaster. Here's a simple example. In the 30s in the 20th century, farmers from Australia faced a serious problem. Cane beetles were spoiling sugarcane in the northern part of the country. Insects devoured a huge amount of the harvest, and people couldn't stop it. They didn't want to spoil the cane with poisonous pesticides, so they brought a group of cane toads from South America in the hope that the toads would eat the pests. But when these toads found themselves in the reed fields, they couldn't reach the bugs, as they lived on tall reeds. The toads just couldn't jump at such height and get the pests. So instead of beetles, they began to eat other insects. Amphibians started multiplying at a tremendous rate. The female cane toad can lay about 30,000 eggs at a time. After 3 days, small tadpoles hatch from the eggs. They swim in the water for 20 weeks and then turn into grown-up toads that live from 5 to 10 years. Millions of jumping animals began taking over the entire northern part of the continent, destroying all the biodiversity around. Leaves, grass, insects, carrion. Toads ate all this and didn't leave food for other animals. The problem was that the toads turned out to be very hardy creatures. Heat, cold, rain, droughts, they can breed anywhere and nothing can stop them. But what about other animals? Australia is full of alligators, big birds, and other creatures that would love to feast on croaking amphibians. Yes, it's true. But any animal that tried to eat these toads didn't survive. The problem is that cane toads are venomous. There are special glands behind their eyes that produce strong toxins that cause serious health problems in any animal. Some farmers saw birds falling from the sky after they had swallowed these amphibians. More than 80 years have passed since farmers brought 100 cane toads to Australia. Now, there are about 1.5 billion of them. They have already covered 386,000 square miles, which is about the same area as the states of Texas and Oklahoma combined. And so far, scientists and biologists haven't come up with an effective way to deal with them. People tried to catch them, but it was useless. Even if you catch 98 toads out of 100 next to a small pond, the 2 remaining toads can produce 30,000 eggs per night. Nature may be able to restore balance when some animals with immunity to toad toxins appear in Australia. But at the moment, cane toads are unstoppable. How can we stop the uncontrolled population of mosquitoes that are dangerous to humans? The correct answer is to create 735 million genetically modified mosquitoes and mix these 2 groups. All over the world, many species of mosquitoes carry infections that cause serious health problems to humans. Almost no one likes mosquitoes. These buzzing insects prevent us from sleeping, and their bites are incredibly itchy. Many people would probably be happy if these creatures disappeared from the face of the earth. And scientists might have found a way to make this wish come true. Only female mosquitoes bite us because they need food to produce eggs. So, scientists released genetically modified male mosquitoes with a special protein in their bodies. After 2 mosquitoes come into contact, this protein is transmitted from the male to the female and then prevents it from producing offspring. All this happens before the age when females begin to bite. So, females can't create offspring, which means they don't need to bite people and animals anymore. And the more of such proteins scientists spread, the smaller the mosquito population will be. It sounds good, but about 240,000 people have signed a petition to cancel this experiment. Many scientists believe that the disappearance of one insect species can lead to a biological catastrophe. Nature is a complex, balanced system where the slightest change can lead to serious problems. Mosquitoes are a food source for many reptiles and amphibians. The extinction of mosquitoes can trigger the disappearance of many species. It's like a chain reaction of catastrophes, the end of which is unknown. Nevertheless, modified mosquitoes have already been released in Florida, and it seems that nothing terrible has happened. The good news is that people have fewer health problems after that. Moreover, since 2019, about 1.5 billion mosquitoes have been released worldwide. It has saved millions of lives and hasn't disrupted the delicate balance of nature yet. Recently, scientists have released another group of safe mosquitoes in East Africa. Well, let's hope that scientists have everything under control. Invasive species are not always mosquitoes, flies, or amphibians. These can also be large animals, such as feral pigs or super pigs. These pigs are a mix of domestic swine and wild boar. There are already almost 7 million feral hogs in the south of the USA. Thanks to people's efforts, these animals haven't spread to the north yet. But the danger to the northern states comes from Canada. Pigs were brought there in the 80s to support agriculture. But in the early 2000s, wild boars lost their popularity. They just stayed in the wild, and farmers were sure that those animals wouldn't survive the harsh Canadian winter. Oh, how wrong they were. Wild pigs turned out to be hardy, mobile, and capable of rapid reproduction. These animals dig and tear up the ground, eat almost everything they come across, and thus take food from other animals. By the way, other creatures can become their lunch too. Wild pigs attack mice, geese, ducks, and some species of deer. They trample crops, grass, and flowers and are not afraid of anything. They're like natural bulldozers. Any farm is in danger of extinction if it's in the path of thousands of super pigs. And people can't do anything with them. The northern states understand that an invasion is imminent, so they're preparing for a long battle. Super pigs love swampy areas with tall grass. Canadian and American farmers will try to drive them into more open areas and fence those places off. The plan is not perfect, but it can slow the pigs down and save some time. Have you noticed that American vehicles are getting larger? The top 3 best-selling vehicles in the US for 2023 are all massive pickup trucks. When you look at the top 15 car models sold, only 3 of them are sedans. Everything else is either an SUV or a truck. In the rest of the world, automobiles are notably compact. In Europe, for example, compact cars like city vehicles, subcompacts, and smaller cars accounted for over 35% of sales in 2021. In the United States, these 3 categories represented just a little over 10% of sales. I mean, there's a trend for extra in many aspects of consumption. Refrigerators in kitchens or fast food meals are larger than their counterparts in other countries. Studies say that consumers have a preference for larger vehicles when given the choice. So there's a bit of a chicken and egg situation here. Consumer preferences have pushed car manufacturers to produce progressively larger vehicles. Massive trucks and SUVs were made one after another. And then, to top it off, this giant 8-foot-tall red truck came roaring by and left behind a trail of thick smog. Considering rising environmental concerns and record-breaking heat worldwide, you would expect smaller cars to be more popular. Apparently, no. But when thousands of people follow this trend, many other problems come along. We'll get to that later. The Ocean State used to be the last stronghold of the majority car culture, but it couldn't resist any longer. Even Rhode Island has had a takeover of trucks. From the 1900s until the late 1980s, cars ruled the roads across the nation. But in 1989, trucks made their move, starting with Alaska. After that, several states in the Mountain West and Northern Plains joined the truck trend. It was after 2008 that most states embraced trucks, especially when crossover utilities gained popularity in the suburbs. This truck wave seemed to peak in 2012. More than a dozen states switched allegiance. Here, some industry experts argue that regulatory gaps have contributed to this transformation. Loopholes that favor trucks have played a significant role in driving this trend. Updated tracking methods by the Federal Highway Administration included pickups, SUVs, vans, crossovers, and even commercial and government vehicles in the truck category. Okay, but why do people want to go for these vehicles? Well, gas is relatively cheap in America. Plus, many people find larger vehicles more convenient. Lastly, with massive advertising and lobbying budgets, car companies have a strong motivation to sell people light trucks. Cars usually have 2 rows of seats and a trunk or hatchback, while light trucks are typically built on a truck chassis. In the case of many crossovers, they're built on a car chassis with some off-roading features added. Nowadays, the theoretical distinction between a car and a truck can be a bit blurry. What's certain is that trucks are generally more profitable than cars, thanks to 2 historical factors. First, there's the chicken tax, a 25% tariff imposed in 1964 as part of a trade clash with Europe. This tariff made producing pickups and cargo vans more profitable in the US, because foreign factories couldn't undercut the prices of American manufacturers. Second, the corporate average fuel economy standards were established in 1975. They were more lenient for work trucks and light trucks compared to family sedans. Trucks were also exempt from the 1978 gas guzzler tax. These incentives led American car manufacturers to focus on trucks. In fact, this sort of resulted in the birth of the SUV, which often combines the features of a car and a truck. Nowadays, you go towards a crossover SUV if you have a family of 5, for example. It's a vehicle resembling a station wagon with some extra features. These extras allow it to be classified as a light truck. In 2016, the automotive landscape in the United States was undergoing a noticeable shift as SUVs and pickup trucks took center stage on the market. With each passing month, the share of traditional car sales was gradually shrinking. It was largely due to the lower petrol prices and changing consumer preferences. SUVs have long held a special place in the hearts of Americans. Crossovers, a category including smaller SUVs like the Toyota RAV4 and Ford Escape, bear a striking resemblance to the cars of the 1950s. These similarities emphasize the vehicle's taller profile, elevated seating position, and spacious interiors. This combination resonated with consumers, who appreciated the commanding view of the road and expansive window views, causing them to drift away from the traditional sedan. Sales of larger sedans had taken a sharp dive, and even the luxury sedan market had stagnated. This pushed companies like Maserati and Jaguar, originally known for their sports cars, into the SUV market. Even iconic brands like the Porsche began to focus on SUVs and crossovers. They realized the popularity trend of consumers. Andrew Coetzee, head of product planning at Toyota, says that their strategy emphasizes injecting more personality and flavor into their vehicles, particularly to cater to younger buyers. Okay, the look and feel of these giants might be great, but now let's explore the less seen side. There are drawbacks to these larger vehicles. They come with a heftier price tag and tend to consume more fuel. When they were first made, fuel prices weren't high, but now spending more on fuel can be a problem for your wallet. There's more. Some research suggests that accidents involving larger vehicles contribute to more fatalities on American roads than their counterparts. They also pose a greater risk to pedestrians and cyclists. The number of pedestrian fatalities has doubled. In 2021, road accidents became the second leading cause of saying goodbye to this world for Americans under 45. This situation would be merely intriguing if the large vehicles didn't have a range of potentially lethal attributes. As American cars have grown in size, the number of fatalities among drivers and passengers inside these rolling fortresses has decreased by 22%. But according to experts' estimates, thousands of pedestrians' lives could have been saved between 2000 and 2018 if Americans had continued to favor smaller vehicles. The association of individualism with driving can also have the worst consequences for those inside cars. Almost 1 in 10 drivers and front seat passengers in the US don't wear seatbelts, and 45% admit to regularly driving at least 15 miles per hour over the speed limit on highways. These percentages are far lower in the UK at just 3%. In total, 43,000 individuals lost their lives on American roads in 2021. This is the highest mortality rate among developed nations by a substantial margin. Estimates indicate that a fifth of these lives could have been spared each year if the rates of speeding and seatbelt use matched those of comparable countries. Modern-day pickup trucks are now designed more for kids and families than livestock and giant rocks. Before the 80s, nearly every pickup truck in the US had a single cab, meaning you could squeeze in a total of 3 people inside. They all shared a bench-style seat. Plus, the bed stretched 8 feet, making the truck a full-sized, long-bed vehicle. But these models are becoming a relic of the past. As of 2020, 80% of pickup trucks in the streets sported what we might call extended crew cabs. This means they've got not 1, but 2 sets of comfy seats for up to 5 people. Most of these models also have 4 doors that could rival your average suburban home's entrance. The cargo space? Well, let's just say it's been put on a diet. These passenger-packed cargo-slimmed setups have become all the rage, so much so that a few brands have said farewell to single-cab models. As pickup trucks evolved into family-friendly rides, they underwent a makeover too. The typical American truck now commands a price tag close to $50,000, marking a 41% surge from a mere decade ago. These trucks often flaunt lavish, feature-packed interiors crafted to give high-end SUVs and sedans a run for their money.
According to the United Nations, India became the most populous country in the world in 2023. Can you guess where the United States of America stands in that rating? It's number 3. And America is the 4th largest country in terms of size. It takes up some 6% of Earth's landmass. Plenty of space for 335 million people who live there, right? No need to squeeze them into one region. Well, not quite. The population of the U.S. is distributed pretty unevenly. Let's draw a line right through the middle of the country. It'll run from North Dakota in the north to Texas in the south. Once you input census data and do some math, astounding figures appear. 80% of the U.S. population lives east of the imaginary line. The remaining 20% live to the west. That's just 1 in 5 Americans. We're talking about large metropolitan areas such as Los Angeles, San Diego, and San Francisco. You don't believe me? Just look at a satellite map of the U.S. at night. The right part is shining pretty bright, right? But why? Why is there such a huge imbalance in population? Simply put, history and geography. The East Coast is the place where the U.S. became independent in 1776. These are the original 13 colonies. Soon enough, settlers started spreading westward. One important milestone was the Louisiana Purchase. Today, this region is mostly what we call the Midwest. The area aligns nicely with the Mississippi watershed. Yup, this means plenty of fertile soil ideal for agriculture. But does this automatically mean a spike in population? The demographics of the U.S. reveal that a majority of its citizens live either on the east or the west coast. This leaves a large patch of land in the middle of the country virtually empty. People know it as America's underpopulated belt. The area stretches from the Canadian border in the north to Mexico in the south. The total surface area of this strip of land is 350,000 square miles. That's twice the size of California. One massive piece of land. In fact, this narrow strip accounts for 12% of the contiguous United States. That's the U.S. without Alaska and Hawaii. The belt runs north to south through 7 states, but its population makes up only 1% of the total number of people living in the United States. Now, this doesn't mean that the area is completely empty. It's still home to just over 3 million people. That's roughly the population of the island country of Jamaica. But there is room here for many more residents. Let's take the example of Nigeria. Its total land area is slightly bigger than the sparsely inhabited belt in America. But Nigeria's population is a huge 206 million people. This makes it the 7th most populated country on the planet. Impressive, right? But why isn't the American Midwest living up to its potential? Well, time for one last history lesson. I've already mentioned how the United States expanded from the East Coast to the West Coast. This doesn't mean that the West was lagging too far behind. Take, for example, the cities of San Francisco and Los Angeles. They were incorporated in 1850. That's just 13 years after Chicago. The following year, Portland, Oregon became incorporated. You get the picture. And then, in 1869, the United States completed building its first transcontinental railroad. In terms of transport, the country was unified. There is no historical reason strong enough to explain why so few people live in the center of the country. So now it's time for some interesting geography. If you look at the physical map of the United States, you'll notice that this belt lies in the Great Plains. As the name suggests, the area is flat, which should be ideal for large settlements. Well, not really. East of this region, there is a huge patch of the color brown. It's covered by mountains. But not just any mountains. These are the Rockies. The range is around 76 million years old. It has several peaks over 14,000 feet. And most of the Rockies are national parks, a vast nature reserve. But most importantly, the range plays a vital role in the region's climate. Ever heard of the rain shadow effect? Let me explain. Wet weather systems form over the Pacific Ocean. Then they travel east, where they meet the Rockies. Now the air has to go up over the mountains. This is where it cools down and condenses. The final result? A lot of rain and snow for the people living on or west of the range. And just a few drops east of it. When air from the Pacific finally reaches the Great Plains, it doesn't contain much moisture anymore. In fact, the weather system starts taking up moisture from the surrounding landscape. This creates an arid climate east of the Rocky Mountains. That's the exact location of the belt where so few Americans live. It's one of the driest parts of the country. So when settlers came in the 19th century, they were like, nah, I'll just continue west. Plus, there was the gold rush in California they were heading for. The climate in this part of the plains isn't great for agriculture, and huge fluctuations in air temperature don't help either. In a single day, temperatures can drop from 70 to 30 degrees Fahrenheit. These sudden changes in outside temperature are harmful to human health. It's like stepping inside an air-conditioned room on a sizzling summer day. Not a pleasant feeling. Southern California has a similarly dry climate, yet close to 40 million people live there. This makes California the most populous U.S. state. Their secret? A vast network of irrigation canals and aqueducts, plus a share of water from the Colorado River. Summers in the Great Plains get very hot, while winters are extremely cold. The reason behind these wild weather patterns are polar winds. They get a piggyback ride along the ridges of the Rockies and then rapidly descend into the plains. A winter day in Wyoming, for example, can start pleasantly warm, but later in the afternoon, the temperature can easily drop below zero. You just wouldn't know how to dress, and you probably wouldn't want to relocate here. That's what 99% of Americans think too. Humans like to feel comfortable, so we choose to live in temperate climate zones. Places that are either too cold or too hot don't have a large population. Just look at the driest inhabited continent. You've guessed it correctly, it's Australia. Nearly 70% of the country is either arid or semi-arid. That's a subtle way of saying that it's a desert. That's why Australians are huddled in coastal areas. 90% of them live in big cities, such as Sydney, Melbourne, and Perth. The only exception is the capital, Canberra. They build it inland close to a water source. But Australia's interior is sparsely populated. Just like in the States, there is only one major town in an area the size of 12 Lake Michigans. A huge shout-out to the residents of Alice Springs. They truly live in an oasis. And what about places with a temperate climate, like Europe? The population is evenly distributed here, right? Well, yes and no, depending on the country. In Germany, 77% of people live in urban areas. They have plenty of major cities to choose from. Berlin, Hamburg, Munich, and Köln all have over 1 million residents. But let's look at neighboring France. How many cities with a population over 1 million can you name? Okay, Paris, definitely. It has over 12 million residents in the metropolitan area. But now comes the staggering fact. The next two cities on the list have a population of barely 2 million, respectively. Can you notice the huge imbalance? This is the case in most large European countries. In Greece, for example, 35% of the population lives in the capital, Athens. So, the largely underpopulated center of the United States is not a unique example. America is the land of opportunities, but chances of finding a better life are greater in large cities. The country's top 100 metropolitan areas account for at least 3/4 of the nation's GDP, and most of them are located on the east and the west coast. There are no cities with over 1 million residents in America's underpopulated belt.
In some ways, the United States is a whole different world, totally different from every other place. So let's take a look at what's normal there that baffles people from the outside. One of the first things a foreigner notices when entering the country is flags. American flags everywhere. On buildings like schools and houses, and on clothes like shorts, t-shirts, you name it. Throughout history, Americans have changed 27 flags. The current American flag was only adopted in 1960 and is so far the longest-lasting flag of the country. It wasn't created by the authorities, though. In 1958, there was a contest for a design of the new American flag, and the winning flag was made by a 17-year-old high school student from Ohio. The reason why Americans love their flag so much is national pride. But why not so many countries do the same? Well, some countries avoid displaying them for historical reasons. Other countries only raise the flag on special occasions to highlight the importance of the event.
Still, some countries display their flag as often as Americans do. In Denmark, people are quite proud of their flag too. They decorate the winter holiday tree and birthday cakes with them, and you can always find stickers with Danish flags, red and white candles, and other goodies with the flag in a grocery store. People in Sweden are also very much into their flag and have flagpoles everywhere. Now, let's go to a restaurant, shall we? Many things there are very specific to the States. Like, for example, tons of ice in every drink. Turns out there is some history to this preference. America has always had a lot of ice as a resource, since New England's lakes and rivers have a lot of those during winter. Centuries ago, before refrigerators and other helpful cooling machines, that kind of cold resource was very valuable, and the States started exporting ice to other parts of the world. And also, of course, consuming it themselves. They started to put ice in their hot drinks, in contrast to the British, who were always drinking their beverages hot. The ice in the drinks has become an American thing, and it was also considered a rich person's drink. Yep, the ice would also show a person's status. Of course, with time, when refrigerators appeared, ice became available to everyone, and Americans started to add it to their drinks commonly. The habit remained, but also, ice drinks are very refreshing, which is especially important in the hot south of the country. But if you come from abroad and don't want your drink freezing cold, always specify it to the waiter. The next striking thing is the huge portions that are served, and there is a reason for that too. It wasn't always like this, but in the second half of the last century, due to pesticides and fertilizers, farmers started to be able to grow more food than they used to. The government caught on, subsidizing them to grow even more food. So, the amount of available food increased. Over time, companies started to increase the sizes of their portions. Why serve less food and get less money if you can serve a bit more and also charge more? That's good for business, and it's a win-win. Customers get more food for just a little bit more money. So, larger portions stuck. Okay, now we need to take a little toilet break. And, surprisingly, there are a lot of foreigners who find American toilets weird. First, what's up with those huge gaps in bathroom stalls? Let's start with the more obvious part, gaps on the bottom of the doors. Those are quite common, even outside the US, and they serve several purposes. First, you can see if there's a person inside without trying to break into an occupied stall. Second, it provides some ventilation and makes it easier to clean the floor in the bathrooms. The gaps on the sides are more questionable. Of course, people on the outside can't see everything going on behind the door, but still, there's not much privacy whatsoever. In most other countries, the gaps are either negligible or non-existent. So what's up with them in America? I did some research. Some sources say that since every inch of material is expensive, wide gaps are made to reduce the costs of bathroom stalls. Other sources say that when people feel exposed like this, they have fewer incentives to do something illegal in public bathrooms. Next observation, American toilets have way more water in their bowls in comparison to, for example, European ones. The reason is that those types of toilets use different flashing systems, and an American one needs more water to flush effectively. In many countries, especially in Asia, most bathrooms have bidets, which are used for after-toilet cleaning, and tourists don't understand why Americans wouldn't adopt those too. After all, if you step in mud, you'll go and wash your foot instead of just wiping it off with a tissue. The same logic works here. Also, it reduces toilet paper usage. So it's more sustainable and it's environmentally friendly. Some say there's a strong stigma in America around bidets that is extremely hard to overcome. Others say that toilets in the US don't have enough room to install a bidet, so they don't have those, especially if there are other well-known ways. Before we leave the restaurant, we need to tip the waiter. Tipping in the United States is way more common than in most other countries. You're expected to tip any service person who helped you with something. While some kind of tipping exists in some other countries, the extent of it is smaller. And there are also countries like Japan and Denmark where tipping isn't a thing at all. Those countries have minimum wage laws that dictate decent wages employers must pay their workers. This way, the need to pay money to service stuff isn't pushed onto the customers. By the way, here's one more fact about the prices. Probably the craziest thing in the States tourists have to adapt to are prices in stores. The tax isn't included into the displayed price and is added on top while checking out. So people who are short on money can't pre-calculate the price they will have to pay to make sure that they have enough money. But really, why is it so? The main reason behind such a weird policy is transparency. This way, taxpayers know how much tax they pay and can resist raising the tax rate in case it comes on the national agenda. Also, it allows buyers to compare the costs of products across states fairly, since tax rates may differ. So, if the tax isn't included, you compare the actual bread costs between Alabama and Alaska, for example. In some places in America, it's not very easy to get around unless you travel by car. In some regions, there's often no sidewalk taking you to the closest convenience store, or a crosswalk, allowing you to cross the road right in front of the store. The main reason for that is probably the fact that the United States is a big country with vast lands and everything is spread out. Neighborhoods can be scattered around, wide suburban territories quite far away from one another, so that's already far from being walking distance, and sidewalks aren't needed because, yes, no one's walking. Studies show that Spanish or Germans walk at least twice as much as Americans, but in those countries, everything is way closer. And last and not least, you guessed it, the imperial system. It's based on the human body. A foot is an average foot size of a person, so you might think it's quite intuitive for anyone. Well, no. Foreigners are incredibly confused with feet, inches, gallons, and Fahrenheits, and tend to convert it all to the familiar metric system. Well, in this sense, the British are even more confusing. Those guys use both imperial and metric systems. For height, it's mostly feet and inches, but for weight, kilograms. Great Britain used to have the imperial system, but later they were forced to switch to the metric system. So now they're using a combination, whatever helps to be more precise.
Ring ring, your mail's here. You ordered it yesterday all the way from across the country, but it only took a day and a half for it to reach you. It's certainly not like the 1800s when your mail would get delivered by horse. The entire process back then would take up to 10 days, and it's not like it came from another continent. Frontiersmen were your postal service. They'd hop on their horses and ride the distance. Considering how far away it was, and it could be thousands and thousands of miles, they did this in a surprisingly short amount of time. Gears have shifted though. We've come to the 1900s, and you're a pilot now. You're en route and it's getting dark, but you're still thousands of feet up in the air. Maybe it's time for you to land since you can't see a thing. Plus, you're starting to run low on fuel. If you were to have an emergency landing right now, things might get iffy down there. You'd be in a strange territory, and you won't know what weird things you might be up against. Some of your coworkers tried, and it wasn't a very good idea. Look out for that shadow. Even if you did want to fly at night without much visibility whatsoever, it wouldn't be a good idea. See, you're guided by landmarks when charting your route. That mountain ahead looks familiar, but the closer you get to it, the more you realize you've made a mistake. It's not like the weather will play nice either. So you stop, and the letters you were carrying will now go on a train where they can ride out for the rest of the night. After dawn, it's time for another pilot to take them up to the sky again to speed up the process. This whole ordeal takes a lot longer than it should just for mail to get across the country, and people are already waiting at their doorstep with their arms crossed and grumpy faces. Radars are nowhere to be seen yet, so great minds got to thinking, what if we change things with some big arrows on the ground? This way, pilots would always know where to go. On top of these, towers would serve as beacons of light. Now pilots would be able to navigate at night, and you wouldn't need to rely on sketchy mountains to know where you're at. The arrows went all the way from New York to San Francisco, and there were approximately 1,500 of them. Towers were 50 feet tall, and their lights would rotate while flashing every 10 seconds. The arrows themselves were pretty huge too, about 50 to 70 feet long. They were painted bright yellow, so you wouldn't miss them. Every 3 to 5 miles, you'd spot one of these arrow beacons. When the weather was nice, you'd be able to see the lights coming from the beacons from as far as 10 miles away. And below those, there was another set of lights. Red and green lights would flash a Morse code, and pilots would know exactly what beacon this was. The worst has happened, and one of your engines is failing. You're prepared for this, and up ahead, there's a landing field placed there exactly for this type of situation. Every 25 miles along the arrow route, you'd find one of these intermediate landing fields with rotating radiant lights on them. Even though less common, these would be more powerful than the other type. You could see them from as far as 75 miles away. But technology kept improving, and it got to the point that the regular beacon lights got so strong, they'd be seen up to 40 miles away in clear weather. Because of this, they only needed one tower every 10 miles. Then, the four-course radio stations came along, and all a pilot needed was a radio receiver, a pair of headphones, and a chart. Arrows became a thing of the past. On the plane, a pilot would listen to audio signals to check if they were on track. And soon, the radio was all there was. You'd have it all: guidance, weather info, and even radio beacon signals. With Morse code communication, pilots would turn to the right when hearing a certain stream of code, and to the left if they heard a different one. A steady tone would mean they could just fly straight ahead. Sometimes, though, mountains would bounce off radio signals, and it would lead pilots into a completely different course. This, of course, would end up with a plane being stranded somewhere. LORAN, that's long-range navigation, coordinated the pilot's location better. These stations were placed all across the Atlantic and the Pacific. Two different stations placed far away from each other would emit a signal at the exact same time. And with the help of two others, also emitting signals, you'd be able to figure out the location of a plane. It's a 4-station work. LORAN had a big weakness: electrical storms. Put simply, if a plane was in the middle of a storm, it would be like it never existed. The last arrow beacon was only shut down in 1973. It lasted a long time. But today, you'll still be able to see some of the arrows from back then. They aren't painted bright yellow anymore, they're just big, plain, concrete arrows. Most of them were lost while redeveloping some of the cities over the United States. There's one west of Phoenix, Arizona. It was the beacon number 33 of the LA to Phoenix Airway. The arrow is gone, but part of the radio tower is still there, although in bad condition. There are about 10 of them in California, and the rest are spread around the country. But let's jump a few years back before the arrows and radio. Around 1910, when pilots would only fly using pilotage, they'd chart their route based on landmarks. They would only dare flying during the day and not at a high altitude. In the 1920s, though, they started venturing into flying at night and even further than they were used to. But since landmarks were nearly impossible to identify at night, they started using celestial navigation. They tried to read the stars to know where they were. They had the help of some tools, but it wasn't too effective because they would still get lost more often than not. Turbulence wouldn't help either, because instead of reading one star, they'd look at a completely different one, the wrong one. With no light pollution and way too many stars to count, it was too easy to get lost in the sky. A plane stays aloft because its wings are shaped so that air moves faster over the top of the wing, and because the air is moving faster, its pressure decreases. It means there's less pressure on top of the wing than on its bottom. It's this difference that lifts the wings and the plane up. Rolling the plane is the aileron's job. You lower the aileron on the wing you want to rise, and you raise the aileron on the wing you want to drop. The pitch is what makes a plane go up and down when the elevators on the plane's tail are adjusted by the pilot. Lowering them will make the plane's nose drop, and raising them will make it rise. The yaw is what makes the plane turn, It's the rudder's job. When it is turned to one side, it'll move either left or right. The nose of the plane will always be pointed in the same direction as the rudder. Next time you're on a commercial flight, you can track the plane's movement yourself and know what the pilot's doing. Not entirely though, because there are tons of complicated mechanics and systems at work in that cabin in front of you. And if you want to know how that works, it might be time for you to enroll in a flight academy. Maybe one day you'll fly fast enough to break the sound barrier. Pilots that do this literally break the sound waves that form in front and around the plane. Air will gather and compress in front of the plane. This will form a shock wave that the plane needs to go through, and when it does, it makes a really loud noise, a sonic boom. It's because of the sudden change in the air pressure. The Concorde was a commercial plane that was way too expensive for an average person. It not only broke through the sound barrier, but could travel up to 5 times the speed of sound.
The floor is lava. Haha, just kidding. But honestly, it's kind of falling apart. You might not feel it yet, but a huge part of North America has already lost 37 miles worth of rock from its foundation. And no, this isn't about earthquakes or giant sinkholes. It's about the continent losing pieces of the very thing that keeps the ground from wobbling around like a bad carnival ride. A team of researchers has just dropped a geological bombshell. Part of North America's ground is thinning out like a very sad, very slow ice cream drip. How do they know? They basically gave Earth a high-tech full-body MRI and created 3D maps showing how rocks once considered indestructible are now melting away into the planet's guts, like an upside-down cheese pizza inside an oven. But to really understand this mess, you first have to meet my old friends, cratons. Cratons are like the roots of the continents. They're thick, tough, and ancient. We're talking billions of years old. These bad boys survived meteor impacts, supervolcanoes, and even the tectonic movement of plates. If the plates got into fistfights, for example, you can bet we would see mountain ranges being born. If they got a divorce, drifting apart from each other, then a whole new ocean would be born. All of these things leave scars on the surface of Earth, but the cratons seem to always remain unfazed, like the cockroaches of geology. And since a craton can basically get punched in the face and feel nothing, scientists always assumed these things were nearly indestructible. But then, a group of researchers took their fancy machines to the test and realized that, wait, the cratons are falling apart? How? Enter the Farallon Plate, a really ancient tectonic plate that started to slide under North America's major plate over 100 million years ago. This is a pretty normal process, actually. It's called subduction, and it's how Earth recycles rocks and keeps itself from overheating. This subduction thing has been happening for so long that, by now, the Farallon is almost 400 miles away from the craton, sitting pretty chill at the lower mantle, weirdly close to the outer core of our planet. But the Farallon has been causing trouble, like that one roommate who moved out but keeps leaving weird stuff in the fridge. You see, as it sinks, it tugs on the bottom of North America's foundation, stretching it out and causing pieces to fall off into the deep mantle. And if that wasn't enough drama, the sinking Farallon has also leaked water and carbon dioxide into the surrounding rocks, making the craton even softer and easier to shred apart. Thanks, Farallon. Very cool of you. By studying hundreds of earthquakes across thousands of monitoring stations, scientists have confirmed the story. Big chunks of continental material are dripping downward, thinning the craton by as much as 37 miles. That's more missing rocks than can fit into a milk carton. Sounds dramatic, right? But don't worry. This is happening at a snail's pace. It'll take millions of years for anything noticeable to happen. Your great-great-great-great few grandkids from the distant future might still be standing on solid ground. But don't get too comfy. This thing may not be an urgent problem, but there's another type of sinking that's happening faster than you can say, "Help!" Here's the thing. By 2050, at least 32 major cities in the US, including New York, Baltimore, and Charleston, could be partially underwater. And guess what? This one is mostly our fault. Scientists noticed that since 2007, some cities have been sinking into the ground between 0.04 and 0.08 inches every year. Charleston in South Carolina is pulling ahead in the worst way possible, sinking 0.15 inches annually. Sure, these numbers sound tiny and a bit ridiculous, but Charleston is barely 9 feet above sea level, and a little sinking goes a long way when the ocean is breathing down your neck. On really bad flood days, people there have to abandon their cars and basically swim home. This whole phenomenon is called land subsidence, and when you mix sinking land with rising sea levels, you get a disaster cocktail of flooded streets, salty farmland, ghost forests, and a lot of very cranky homeowners. And it doesn't stop with just homes. Infrastructure like bridges, roads, airports, and power plants, all things we rely on daily, are also at risk of serious damage. Flooded electrical grids and sunken highways could cause billions more in economic losses and create major safety hazards for communities. Now, let's be fair. Not everything is humanity's fault. Some of this trouble dates all the way back to the Ice Age. About 12,000 years ago, massive ice sheets covered the northern US. They were heavy, like seriously heavy. The weight pushed the land down, and when the ice melted, the ground didn't just pop back up like a trampoline. Instead, it started playing a weird game of geological seesaw. The places that were squished started rising, and the places that weren't got pulled down. This whole process, called glacial isostatic adjustment, try to say that 3 times fast. But of course, humans found a way to make it worse. Groundwater extraction is a major culprit. Think of it like pulling the stuff out of the mattress. After a while, the whole thing just sags. In places like California's Central Valley, the land is dropping by up to 8 inches a year because we keep pumping out water during droughts. In cities like New York, the problem isn't just water. Skyscrapers themselves are making it worse. Yep, turns out if you stack millions of tons of concrete and steel onto soft ground, it tends to flatten. And in case you're wondering, the total mass of New York City's buildings is around 1.68 trillion pounds. That's about the same as 3.5 million statues of liberty piled up. With so much weight concentrated over a relatively small area, the underlying soils have no choice but to compress over time. And if you thought it couldn't get messier, think again. We've been building dams, which stop rivers from delivering fresh sediment to coastal areas. That sediment is kind of like Mother Nature's way of fluffing the ground back up. Without it, coastal lands are compacting like an old sponge. Plus, when wetlands are drained for agriculture or construction, the peaty soil dries out and collapses. Honestly, it's like the ground just can't catch a break. Scientists also noticed that the areas that used to be lush wetlands are now among the fastest sinking spots in the country, especially along the Gulf Coast. Louisiana, for example, is losing about a football field of land because of this mix of subsidence and rising seas. So what's the end game here for us regular people who just want to live above sea level? Well, it's not looking great. Ghost forests, which are basically drowned woodlands, are popping up. Farmland is turning salty and unusable. And even sunny day flooding, where streets flood without any rain, is becoming a thing. Yikes! Meanwhile, over on the West Coast, California is not exactly winning either. San Francisco and Los Angeles are both sinking, which means that rising sea levels could hit them twice as hard and twice as fast. In some places like the Palos Verdes Peninsula, the ground has been sinking so fast, people over there might as well live like moles. So, is America turning into the next Atlantis? Probably not next week, but without serious action, like cutting back on groundwater pumping and planning smarter cities, at least 500,000 people are in serious danger. And the housing damage could easily rack up a jaw-dropping $109 billion by 2050. In the end, while North America isn't about to sink like a poorly made souffle, it's definitely showing some cracks in the crust. So maybe let's ease up on groundwater pumping, rethink how and where we build, and invest a little more in keeping our feet dry. After all, if the floor really does become lava someday, we're gonna wish we had at least fixed the leaks first. There's nothing around, just the eternal, endless whiteness of Greenland's snow and cold winds blowing into your face. Nothing hints at the impending catastrophe. You take another step and freeze in horror. An abyss is spreading at your feet, bottomless and dark. If you had made a bigger step, it would have swallowed you. That infamous Greenland's hole. It happened in the middle of the 2010s. A group of geologists were scanning the surface of Greenland's Hiawatha Glacier using radar when they spotted something very, very strange. It was a giant pit, more than 980 feet deep and almost 20 miles wide. That's big enough to fit inside Washington, D.C. or Paris. After staring at their radars for quite a while and scratching their heads, researchers decided to find out what could have made such a huge hole. Could it have been good old erosion? A raging volcano? An asteroid impact? A giant sandworm? Ugh, I might have gone a bit overboard with this worm idea, but you never know with these ancient glaciers. Anyway, in our case, one mystery seemed to lead to another, which had been puzzling scientists for decades. And to solve both of them, scientists needed something super common, but at the same time very important: quartz, one of the most abundant materials in Earth's crust. But before we dig deeper into this topic, let's make a small detour and talk about a pretty bizarre phenomenon called the Younger Dryas event. To see what it was like, we need to go deep into the past, as far back as 12,900 to 11,600 years ago. During that period, the planet became much colder, especially in Europe and North America. Now, let's talk a bit more about that weird climate change in the Northern Hemisphere. There are a few theories. One that involves a change in currents in the Atlantic Ocean. Another speaks about something large kicking tons of dust into the air and effectively blocking sunlight. The two most popular and likely hypotheses mention a volcanic eruption and an asteroid impact. Indeed, there was a volcanic eruption on the territory of modern-day Germany at around the right time. But there's also a probability that a space object struck the planet during this period too. And now let's get back to the hole scientists found in Greenland. When NASA's Ice Bridge program and Germany's Alfred Wegener Institute discovered it, it seemed they had finally found the reason for the Younger Dryas event. But was it really an asteroid that created that impressive pit and caused temperatures to drop all over the Northern Hemisphere? To test this theory, the researchers needed quartz. The thing is, in its pure form, quartz has a very simple structure. It's made from interlocking silicon-oxygen tetrahedra. Efficient and so pretty. Just look at these six-sided prismatic crystals. Since its structure is so simple and the components are so common, you can find quartz almost in any rock on the planet. At one point, magic happens. Larger rocks erode away, pushing out tiny bits of quartz sand. The scientists exploring the mysterious pit gathered the quartz sand that had been washed out from underneath the glacier. It was like looking at the rocks at the very bottom of the hole without having to actually get all the way down there. Very handy. So while examining the material, they discovered quartz grains with the telltale signs of terrible catastrophe. They had PDFs all over them. No, I'm not talking about the document format. PDFs stand for planar deformation features, and they look like lines etched into the crystal surface. These lines are a sign that you're holding shocked quartz. It forms under immense pressure, when the internal crystals are pushed out of alignment. But the most exciting thing here is that shocked quartz only appears under the influence of powerful forces, like massive impacts or terrifying explosions. In other words, finding this poor shocked quartz under the Hiawatha Glacier could be much needed proof that the hole was an enormous impact crater that formed when something equally enormous crash landed there. Based on the size of the crater, This space object probably was a bit more than a mile across, which is twice the height of the Burj Khalifa Tower in Dubai. A meteorite that big would have looked 3 times as bright as the sun when traveling across the sky, and it would have hit Earth with an immense force. The impact would have been so great it'd have vaporized rock and thrown debris for hundreds of miles away. The sky would have filled with dust. It would have dimmed the sun and led to a temperature drop all over the planet. And guess what? The last part about decreasing temperatures got the researchers super excited, because it opened up a possibility that the impact could have been connected to the Younger Dryas event. To prove this idea, scientists decided to use quartz again. They examined it more closely, trying to date the impact. Well, they were in for an even greater shock. The Hiawatha crater turned out to be not 12,000, but 58 million years old. On the other hand, the researchers were disappointed that they hadn't been able to confirm their theory. The crater couldn't explain the Younger Dryas cold snap, but on the other hand, it was still an amazing discovery. Now, get ready for one final twist to this story, and it revolves around quartz again. Other scientists have recently discovered more deposits of shocked quartz all over what is now the eastern USA. It was hiding in sediment layers dating to just before the Younger Dryas. Interestingly, there aren't any craters around those sites whatsoever. But quartz can't lie. It provides evidence of a powerful explosion. It makes scientists think that their impact hypothesis might still be true, but instead of a collision, it could be an airburst. A massive comet could have broken up while entering Earth's atmosphere around 12,000 years ago, and the fragments could have exploded before reaching the ground. It would have caused catastrophic mass burning throughout the North American continent and messed with the climate so much that the Younger Dryas would have been triggered. Well, I guess we need to wait a bit longer for scientists to find some further proof of this hypothesis. But it doesn't mean we don't have any more curious phenomena to explore in Greenland. Take these fascinating holes. They sure are kinda smaller than the monster we were talking about. They're called moulins, and they carry surface meltwater all the way down to the base of the Greenland ice sheet. And they have prepared some surprises for us too. Apparently, they're way larger than we previously thought. That's what a recent study based on observation and first-hand exploration claims. Even more interesting, this high volume might influence the stability of the ginormous ice sheet in question, as well as the speed at which it's sliding towards the sea. Researchers think that increased water depth and pressure inside moulins might lubricate the base of the ice sheet, making it move faster. You know, the way an ice cube slides more easily on a thin film of melted water. Until recently, we knew too little about the real size of moulins and how much water they can hold. But now, we know that moulins can be giant. The team made 2 trips to the Greenland ice sheet in 2018 and 2019. And during each of them, they used ropes and climbing equipment to drop around 330 feet into 2 separate moulins, almost touching the water's surface. Those who did it described the experience as intimidating. Picture this. Your back is over the edge. All you see is bluish ice going down and blurring into blackness. And the only thing you hear is occasional sounds of crashing ice. It must be extremely unnerving. These dark patches on Greenland's ice sheet aren't just any old stains. Every summer, the ice, which is usually bright white, turns murky gray in certain areas. This so-called dark zone was a huge mystery for a long time, until some studies discovered that this weird transformation was connected to the odd appearance of red, green, and brown-colored algae. The scariest part is that this algae bloom keeps growing. The dark zone is getting darker, and terrifying microbes might start appearing. Now, the rest of the world should be concerned. The Greenland ice sheet is like a massive ice blanket that covers around 80% of the island. It's so thick that it holds about 8% of the world's freshwater ice. For most of the year, the ice looks like a giant untouched white sheet stretching over the land. But when summer rolls around and temperatures start to rise, things begin to change. The ice melts, revealing rocky areas along the coast. And as you move further inland, that once smooth white ice becomes darker. This is the dark zone, and it covers an area of around 248 miles in length and 62 miles at its widest point. This weird phenomenon happens basically for two reasons. The first one is black carbon. Just like dust that builds up on your bookshelf, the ice in Greenland has the same issue. The wind carries a mix of dust and soot to this icy area. But unlike your bookshelf, you can't just wipe it off with a cloth. In Greenland's case, this dirty mix settles on the ice and sticks around for thousands of years. So, the dark zone is basically covered in a fine layer of dust that's built up over time. Back in 2014, researchers analyzed this dirty mix and found that the darker ice areas were filled with black carbon. This black carbon didn't just appear out of thin air. Well, actually, it sorta did. Scientists believe it mostly comes from smoke produced by wildfires in northern Canada and Alaska somewhere in the past. As you might guess, black carbon is black, which is why it makes the ice look darker. Now, the second big reason for the Greenland ice sheet's summer makeover has to do with those algae we mentioned earlier. We're mostly talking about two types of it, the Ancylonema alaskana and the Ancylonema nordenskjoldii. Both of them love cold water regions. During winter, they stay in a dormant state deep within the ice. But when spring comes, they start to slowly migrate to the surface. By the time summer hits, they're ready to bloom and soak up nearly 24 hours of sunlight each day for photosynthesis and growth. Normally, these algae are green, but when exposed to sunlight, they turn brown as a natural way to protect themselves from harmful ultraviolet rays. And this color change is also what makes the ice in Greenland look darker. So far, this has been normal behavior. What's really alarming is that these algae blooms are getting bigger and bigger every year. This happens because they thrive on phosphorus, a nutrient that's plentiful out there and comes from a mineral called hydroxylapatite. This mineral is found in a type of rock that breaks down into tiny dust particles, which are then blown across the ice by the wind. As the climate gets warmer, the rocks dry out more, and stronger winds carry more dust. More dust means more phosphorus, leading to more algae growth. See? It is a cycle, and it keeps getting worse every year. Studying this is crucial to understanding why the dark zone keeps getting bigger. From the year 2000 to 2012, its size increased by 12%. But you might be wondering, why should we care? After all, it's just ice getting darker, right? Well, not exactly. Think about how you can't stand wearing black clothes on a hot, sunny day. They soak up the heat and make you feel even hotter. That's because darker surfaces absorb more sunlight. The same thing happens to ice. Together, dust, black carbon, and algae blooms are responsible for about 70% of the variability in albedo on the Greenland ice sheet. Albedo is just a fancy word for how reflective a surface is. If you take two surfaces, one white and shiny and the other dark and rough, the white one will reflect a lot of light and heat, giving it a high albedo. The dark one, on the other hand, will absorb more light and heat, so it has a low albedo. During the summer, the Greenland ice sheet experiences a reduction in albedo. This means the ice absorbs more sunlight, and when ice absorbs more sunlight, it melts faster than it should. This is why understanding what's happening in the dark zone is so important. It helps predict how quickly the Greenland ice sheet is melting and how it can affect the rest of the world. Greenland's ice sheet is the second largest in the world, covering an area about the size of all the land in the United States east of the Mississippi River. And its huge mass of ice averages a thickness of 1.4 miles. Unfortunately, the ice loss has skyrocketed. Back in the 1990s, Greenland was losing about 25 billion tons of ice per year. Now, it's losing around 234 billion tons per year. That's nearly 10 times more ice melting away each year. According to NASA, if all of Greenland's ice sheet were to melt, it would increase global sea levels by about 24 feet. That could be catastrophic for coastal countries and cities around the world. The Netherlands could be submerged, the Bahamas could be almost completely wiped out, and many of the Philippines Islands would be at risk of disappearing. All of this may seem like a distant reality, and it is true that most scientists believe it would take several hundred or even thousands of years for the ice sheet to melt completely. But it is important to know that Greenland didn't always have this thick layer of ice. Very recently, researchers took a close look at some sediment from the bottom of a 2-mile deep ice core extracted from the center of Greenland. They found that the soil had traces of willow wood, insect parts, fungi, and even poppy seeds. So these fossils are the first direct evidence that Greenland's ice sheet melted away in the recent geological past, around 400,000 years ago. At that time, Greenland was home to a green tundra landscape with insects and plants. This discovery is both fascinating and scary because it shows that the ice sheet collapsed before and might be more fragile than scientists originally thought. There is another concern too. A recent research collected meltwater from different spots on the Greenland ice sheet and found that the water samples were packed with hundreds and thousands of microbes. The concern is that they could be released into the ocean in the future. And some studies already suggest that areas near where a lot of glacial meltwater flows have a higher risk of viruses jumping to new hosts, like from animals to humans. Even though experts believe the chance of a doomsday virus coming from the glaciers is very small, it's still not zero. The truth is, we don't know much about the thousands of microbial species living on the surface of the ice, and there is simply not enough data to fully understand how dangerous these organisms might be. All of this might sound concerning, but we shouldn't panic just yet. There's still a lot we don't understand about what is darkening the Greenland ice sheet. We still need more detailed measurements of the relative abundance of dust, algae, and black carbon, as well as a better understanding of how these potentially dangerous microbes could affect our lives. The more we learn, the better we can predict what's going to happen and how we can prepare for it.
In 1994, the Sherman family bought a small ranch in the state of Utah, 150 miles southeast of Salt Lake City. A spacious house, beautiful nature, a starry sky. One night, Terry Sherman heard a strange noise coming from the outside. He went out of the house and saw a huge wolf. He had never seen a wolf of this size. Terry chased the animal away and ran after it, but the wolf's tracks were lost. It was as if it had disappeared into thin air. This was just one of the many creepy and strange cases that occurred at Skinwalker Ranch. The land where the farm is located used to be inhabited by the Ute people. In the past, they clashed with the Navajo, who, according to legend, sent skinwalkers on them. According to locals, a skinwalker is an evil witch who can take the form of any animal or human. There are rumors that skinwalkers still wander in this area. Perhaps the Sherman family saw one of them, but it's not that important. The fact is that the appearance of the huge wolf was just the beginning. Over the next 2 years, the family reported strange flashes of light, mysterious objects in the sky, crop circles, and mysterious voices that seemed to hover overhead. But the worst thing was the damage to livestock. The Sherman family, fortunately, acted contrary to all the cliches of horror movies. In 1996, they sold the cottage to Robert Bigelow, a man who had a lot of money and was interested in buying this particular ranch. But why? Because Robert Bigelow was a fan of strange, unusual phenomenon. He founded the National Institute for Discovery Science, or NIDSI, and the area where Skinwalker Ranch is located had been the center of attraction for creepy things. Since the 1950s, there have been hundreds of reports of mysterious objects in the sky in this region. And no, those are not your typical round flying saucers. People talked about different bright lights that took the form of doorways or portals. So, Robert Bigelow and his NIDSHI reported on glowing figures and animal diseases. But over the years of research, they could not provide any reliable evidence of the existence of something extraordinary. People saw all those strange phenomena, but their equipment didn't catch anything. So it all looked like a big hoax. But in 2016, something interesting happened. Skinwalker Ranch was sold to an anonymous buyer. 4 years later, the new owner did something no one had done before. Now imagine how cool it would be if all the strange phenomena were recorded not on old video cameras with poor quality, but on cool equipment with high-resolution video recording, powerful microphones, thermal imagers, and sensors. And what if you could also watch a live broadcast using this equipment? Well, that's exactly what the new rancher did. His name is Brandon Fugel, a real estate mogul from Utah. He not only bought the ranch, but also signed a contract with the History Channel to create a show, The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch. The point of this project is to apply a scientific approach to unexplained phenomena. To do this, he turned the ranch into a big reality show that's been running for 5 years. The first thing Brandon Fugel stated was that there would be no falsifications, fakes, or computer graphics. No show exploring strange phenomena can compare with this one in terms of realism and authenticity. Fugel uses thermographic imaging systems, plane transponder data receivers, magnetometers, special cameras that detect infrared radiation and convert it to images, and other complicated scientific equipment. He shares all the data with the audience and allows the most devoted fans of the show to monitor 50 cameras with microphones installed throughout the territory live at any moment. For money, of course. Membership in the Skinwalker Ranch Insiders program starts at $8 per month. During the entire existence of the show, more than 10,000 people have signed up. Participants can not only watch the ranch through cameras, but also rotate them and zoom in and out. In addition to cameras and thermal imagers, Fugel launched special lasers into the sky that reflect off any surface. If the sky is clear, the lasers go far up. If there's an object, the lasers reflect off it. In one of the episodes, they used this equipment to detect something flying and invisible. Fugel also said that he had seen strange flying objects with his own eyes. Skinwalker Ranch turned out to be a real twilight zone for him. Now one day, the camera footage showed one of the doors slam shut. Just like that, without any wind. Other terrible phenomena are connected with livestock. Animals often get hurt, and many of them simply don't survive. And there are loads of such strange, unexplained cases. Each episode of The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch is dedicated to a phenomenon and its exploration. But has expensive equipment helped to unravel any secrets or prove the existence of extraterrestrial or mystical forces? If this had been confirmed, the whole world would probably already know about it. Therefore, at the moment, it's just an interesting show for fans of mysterious phenomena. There's no direct evidence of the existence of anything unusual there. But, at the same time, there's no explanation for many creepy things. The show offers a huge scope for speculation and research. Local folklore, flying objects, strange voices, not unlike mine, and many unexplained phenomena are all in one place. If all these stories are true, why are they happening exactly in this area? There are a lot of theories, but let's look at a few of the most popular ones. The first and most obvious one. Imagine that you have a popular show that makes you money. People watch it only because it shows mysterious, inexplicable things. But what if there's an explanation? In this case, the popularity of the show will drop and you'll lose money. It's logical, but why would a real estate mogul with a fortune of several $1 billion deceive people? Besides, if you watch some episodes, you'll see that Fugel is truly passionate about this project. One of the most popular theories is about visitors from other planets. After all, we have glowing flying objects, bright lights in the sky, electrical interferences, and the ability to elude camera lenses. Also, some believe that an unknown object is hidden in the mountain, located next to the ranch. What if it's a spaceship that crashed there millions of years ago and was swallowed by the mountain? It may be emitting bizarre radiation that drives animals crazy and causes hallucinations in humans. A popular, but a rather banal version. Let's move on. The next theory is similar to the previous one, but instead of guests from another planet, it speaks about guests from another dimension. Ooh. Meet the multiverse version. Some unknown creatures from another reality come here, explore this ranch, and leave. This theory explains why some flying objects in the sky look like portals. Those portals may cause malfunctions in electrical appliances. There's one weak point in this theory. Why do these portals appear on the lonely ranch and nowhere else? A strange choice of travel for the residents of other dimensions. Now, the most likely theory belongs to a neuroscientist who claims that all the oddities on the ranch are connected to the geophysical force of the planet. Seismic activity, geomagnetic fields, and shifts in tectonic plates can affect some parts of the human brain responsible for hallucinations. Electromagnetic forces can also affect the stable operation of electrical appliances. So, perhaps all the oddities of this place are the result of increased seismic activity. Glowing lights, giant wolves that leave no footprints, and voices in the air can be a massive hallucination. But if this is true, why doesn't anything similar happen in other places with seismic activity? This idea leads to another theory related to electromagnetic interference. This phenomenon incapacitates batteries, drones, microphones, video cameras, and other equipment. Perhaps it affects the human brain too. But what about those poor affected animals? There are still too many unanswered questions, so stay tuned.
There's an old volcano in Bolivia called Uturuncu. It hasn't erupted in about 250,000 years, so you may think that's the end of its story. But recently, it has started to act a little strangely. At the moment, it resembles a zombie that's waking up from a long nap. Uh-oh, is that kind of apocalypse nearing? Uturuncu is a huge mountain in the Andes that's almost 20,000 feet tall. It's called a stratovolcano, which means it's big, steep, and cone-shaped. These kinds of volcanoes are made from layers of lava, ash, and rocks. They can have terrifying, powerful, explosive eruptions because their lava is thick and traps gas inside. Think of it like a shaken-up soda that's ready to burst. Famous ones like Mount Vesuvius are just like Uturuncu. And do you remember about the tragic fate of Pompeii, completely destroyed during the eruption of Mount Vesuvius? Does something similar await Bolivia? Even though Uturuncu has been quiet for a long time, scientists have noticed that it's been letting out gas, rumbling with small earthquakes, and even making the ground around it bulge, kind of like it's stretching. So, people started wondering if it was getting ready to erupt again. Scientists decided to take a closer look at this situation and found out that liquid and gas moving around under the volcano is causing all this activity. It doesn't mean the volcano is definitely going to erupt, but it helps explain why it still seems alive. Let's dive into details. Since the 1990s, scientists have been using satellites and GPS to keep an eye on the ground around the Uturuncu volcano. At one point, they noticed something weird. The ground was rising in the middle and sinking around the edges, kind of like a sombrero hat. The middle part has been slowly going up for at least 50 years, by about 0.4 inches a year. It doesn't sound like a lot, but hold on. This strange shape, along with lots of tiny earthquakes and gas like carbon dioxide coming out of the volcano, made scientists think that there might be a giant blob of magma growing under the mountain. If that were true, it could mean only one scary thing. The volcano could be getting ready to erupt. Uturuncu sits on top of a huge underground pool of magma called the Altiplano Puna magma body. This pool is really big and really deep, stretching under parts of Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina. Scientists thought that magma from the APMB might be rising and collecting near the surface, which could lead to an eruption. But now, after studying more than 1,700 earthquakes and checking the rocks around the volcano, scientists have a new idea. Apparently, it's not magma rising up. Instead, hot fluids and gases are traveling up from the APMB through a narrow path shaped like a chimney. These gases, like steam and CO2, can get trapped under the top of the volcano, while salty water, brine, spreads out sideways into tiny cracks in the rocks. This moving gas and water can make the ground rise and fall and cause small quakes, without any magma getting close to the surface. So the good news is, Utarunku probably isn't about to erupt. If it did happen, it would cause serious damage to nearby communities and even pose a threat to human lives. Lava flows could reach towns tens of miles away from the volcano, and volcanic ash could even spread across Bolivia, Argentina, and Chile. Luckily, even though the volcano is still alive and rumbling, it's not as dangerous as scientists once thought. This discovery might help scientists figure out if other volcanoes around the world are getting ready to erupt. Now, let's visit Alaska, where according to researchers, Mount Spur might erupt soon. It's letting out strange amounts of volcanic gases from the top and side vent, the very vent that last erupted in 1992. If it erupts again, it could cause problems for airplanes flying nearby and might send ash falling from the sky. The good news is that nobody lives close to it, so people are safe for now. But even though Mount Spur isn't super dangerous, there are other volcanoes around the world that could be really destructive. One of those is Campi Flegrei, a giant volcano system near the city of Naples. Instead of one big mountain, it has 24 craters spread across the area. It last erupted in 1538, but its biggest eruption happened about 40,000 years ago. That explosion covered the whole Mediterranean region in ash and made temperatures drop by up to 16.2 degrees Fahrenheit in Eastern Europe, which led to a very cold volcanic winter. If Campi Flegrei erupted again today, it could be very dangerous. It might cover Naples and nearby places in ash, causing earthquakes and landslides, and create air pollution and acid rain. Scientists are keeping an eye on it, especially after a 4.4 magnitude earthquake shook the area in March 2025. But the good news is, there's no sign that magma is rising to the surface right now, which means an eruption isn't expected soon. Still, since Italy has a lot of volcanic activity, experts continue to watch it carefully. Mount Vesuvius is also in Italy and is one of the most famous volcanoes in the world. It's known for its huge eruption in 79 CE that buried the Roman cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum. The last time the volcano erupted was in 1944. Today, Vesuvius is even more dangerous because over 3 million people live near it. Around 700,000 people are living illegally right on its slopes, which puts them even more at risk. If the volcano erupts again, it could send rocks and ash flying through the air at nearly 100 miles per hour and cause major destruction, possibly even wiping out Naples. And still, scientists believe a big eruption from Vesuvius probably won't happen for a few hundred more years. But since it's still an active volcano, researchers continue to monitor it. Cumbre Vieja is a volcano on the island of La Palma, which is part of the Canary Islands. It last erupted in 2021. During that eruption, lava poured out of the volcano and flowed all the way to the sea. It destroyed over 3,000 homes, but luckily, thousands of people were safely evacuated. so it wasn't as bad as it could have been. In the past, scientists were worried that a huge eruption could cause the entire western side of the volcano to break off and crash into the ocean. This could create a mega tsunami, sending massive waves hundreds of feet high across the Atlantic Ocean. But more recent studies have shown that this is very unlikely to happen. Mount St. Helens is a volcano in Washington State in the United States. It had a massive eruption in May 1980 that ended the lives of 57 people. That eruption also caused the biggest landslide ever recorded. Hot, pressurized magma exploded from the volcano, shooting ash 15 miles into the sky. Ash covered a huge area, and around 230 square miles of land was destroyed. Mount St. Helens is still active and is expected to erupt again someday, possibly even in our lifetimes. But experts say it's not likely to have another huge sideways blast like the one in 1980, thanks to a deep crater that is now formed at the top. It will change the way the volcano might erupt. Popocatépetl is a big, active volcano in Mexico. It's been slowly erupting on and off since the early 2000s. It's really close to a lot of people, just 40 miles from the Mexico City metropolitan area, which has about 22 million people, and 30 miles from Puebla, which is home to about 6 million inhabitants. If Popocatépetl had a huge eruption, it could cover Mexico City in thick ash as much as 8 inches deep. That ash could block drains, mess up the water, and even stop the electricity from working. Even worse, fast-moving lava and super hot flows, called pyroclastic flows, could rush down the mountain and destroy towns nearby. The volcano was quiet for 50 years, but now it rumbles and shakes pretty often. There have been over a dozen small eruptions, including some as recent as February 2024. Some nearby places got covered in ash, but scientists say this isn't too surprising, and they're keeping a close eye on it. See how the Antarctic Peninsula looks just like South America, but upside down? This isn't just a coincidence. It's the ghost of a 30-million-year-old breakup. These continents were once connected, but their divorce gave birth to an ocean current so powerful it was capable of completely freezing Antarctica and shaping its landscape. Here's how it went down. Tectonic plates pulled a sneaky move and cracked open a ridiculously narrow passage in the ocean, about only 500 miles wide, forcing 4.5 trillion cubic feet of water to flow inside this geological straw. This was the birth of an ocean current stronger than the Amazon River. This ocean current, called the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, by the way, flows in a circular motion, going clockwise because of the strong winds that blow over there. This circular motion around Antarctica caused erosion, shaping the landmass of the continent into a circle, except for that stubborn peninsula, which is being slowly dragged east like a kid refusing to leave a playground. Wait, South America and Antarctica used to be one? Yep, a long time ago. South America, Australia, and Antarctica were all part of a supercontinent called Gondwana, which also included Africa at some point. Back then, South America and Antarctica used to be basically joined at the hip by a land bridge called the Antarctic Land Bridge, which just so happened to be a lush green forest and also a great dinosaur highway. Yeah, you heard it right. Dinosaurs. A 95-million-year-old dino, whose name I can't pronounce, sorry, was discovered in Australia, and scientists found out it had actually been a distant cousin of Argentina's Sarmientosaurus. Same jaw, same chiseled teeth, same everything. These guys were like identical twins, separated by an ocean. How? Because back then, Antarctica wasn't a frozen wasteland. It was a temperate rainforest, like Oregon, making it a pretty nice travel route for a dino family. But the land bridge wasn't just for dinosaurs. About 40 million years ago, the ancestors of Australia's marsupials waddled to the land down under all the way from South America. taking the Antarctica route, another proof that these continents used to be connected. Things remained somewhat peaceful for the dinos and the marsupials until Earth's ground started moving. This is what a German scientist called the continental drift theory, back in 1912. Our German friend here basically looked at the coast of South America and went, "Hey, this looks like it could fit into the coast of Africa." Like a scientific Sherlock Holmes, he noticed what others had overlooked for centuries. The continents were clearly pieces of a larger puzzle. And he was right. Here's the deal. Planet Earth is made of many layers of rocks and metals, like a cosmic onion. The outermost layer, the lithosphere, is divided into pretty solid tectonic plates that move atop a layer of softer, somewhat molten rocks, like slippery ice. This is why the plates move. In fact, they've been rearranging Earth's face for billions of years, with supercontinents forming and breaking apart in cycles, like a slow-motion game of bumper cars. This movement might be pretty slow since most tectonic plates only move 0 to 3.9 inches every year, except for the Nazca plate, racing ahead at 7.8 inches, about as fast as your hair grows. But don't let their snail's pace fool you. These shifting slabs are the ultimate planet shapers. Their slow dance gives us everything from earthquakes that build mountains like the Himalayas, to rifts that birth oceans like the Atlantic. All because the oceanic crust is dense and sinks like a stone, while continental crust floats like a cork. It's this density difference that explains why continents exist at all. Without it, Earth would be completely covered by shallow seas. This slow-motion planetary renovation project is exactly what tore South America and Antarctica apart 30 million years ago. The plates under these continents started to drift apart in a process called crustal extension. It's like the lithosphere was pizza dough being slowly stretched until it thins and splits. As the crust stretched, it became thinner and weaker, eventually cracking like the surface of a drying lake bed. This whole thing gave birth to a new tectonic plate, the Scotia Plate, that emerged between South America and Antarctica, like a geological divorce lawyer. For a while, parts of this plate stayed above water as the last gasp of the Antarctic land bridge. It was Earth's version of that one thread still connecting your hoodie after the zipper breaks. These final connections might have persisted as chains of islands, but just like that fraying hoodie, the connection couldn't last forever. Eventually, this small but mighty plate became the final nail in the coffin of the land bridge connecting the two continents. Just like all the tectonic plates, this one was also on the move. As it expanded eastward, it opened a new passage of water called the Drake Passage, slowly covering the Antarctic land bridge with ocean water. The process was like pulling open elevator doors. At first, just a crack, then wider and wider until the connection was completely broken. This geographical divorce had chilling consequences. The new Drake Passage allowed the Antarctic circumpolar current to form, creating an endless loop of cold water that isolated Antarctica, shaped its land, and even cooled the entire planet. This current acts like a wall around Antarctica, blocking warm water and invasive species while regulating global climate. Eventually, Antarctica turned into an icebox that is 98% covered in ice sheets, and that holds about 61% of Earth's fresh water. Nowadays, this continent holds the title of the windiest, driest, and iciest place on Earth. It's a frozen desert where temperatures plunge below -128.6 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to freeze your breath mid-air. A layer of ice there can be more than a mile thick, and it expands even further in winter to cover an area larger than the continental United States. Today, if you want to travel to Antarctica, the quickest sea route is through the Drake Passage, a 500-mile-wide body of water that is narrow enough for the winds to scream across thousands of miles, transforming into monstrous waves that can tower up to 49 feet, though calm days create waves only 13 to 16 feet high. Still twice as tall as Atlantic waves, mind you. This is probably why sailors call this stretch of ocean the Drake Shake. But tectonic movement isn't just about shifting continents. It's Earth's ultimate life support system. You see, about half of our planet's heat comes from radioactive decay in the core. Thanks, uranium-235. Something like nature's nuclear reactor. This heat is behind everything from volcanoes to the very plate motion that once connected Antarctica to South America. And it only comes out of the core because of tectonic movement. Without this internal heat engine, Earth would be just like Mars. When the plates move and release heat, they also release CO2 gases into the atmosphere, regulating the temperature of our planet. And when the plates move underwater, they take a lot of this CO2 back to Earth's interior, recycling all this gas. This is why the plates can change our air, climate, and even the evolution of life itself just by moving around. But billions of years ago, these plates were not moving around. Back then, it was like Earth was wearing a solid ceramic shell with many cracks. But even without tectonic movement, the heat managed to escape through these cracks in a process called stagnant lid tectonics, kickstarting all life on Earth. And no, tectonic movement is not a thing of the past. Earthquakes are the living proof that it is not just happening today, but might repeat again on a more dramatic scale in the future. You see, to form supercontinents like Pangaea, smaller megacontinents have to dive beneath another. And scientists predict that a similar process might create a new supercontinent called Pangaea Proxima in 250 million years. By then, humans might be extinct or living on Mars, but Earth's tectonic dance will continue, even without us. Not bad for something that moves more slowly than a traffic jam. Turns out, Antarctica and South America used to be BFFs before all that tectonic drama split them up, like a messy breakup that literally froze one of them out. Now, they just awkwardly mirror each other from across the Drake Passage. Classic exes.
Consider South America and Africa. Don't they kind of look like they fit together, like puzzle pieces? Well, they actually did. But about 130 million years ago, South America was like, bye, and slowly started drifting away. These days, it's around 1,800 miles from Africa, and it's still on the move. Every year, the continent shifts a little more toward the Pacific Ocean. So, how's that even happening? Tectonic plates are constantly moving. That's what makes the Earth's surface shift over time, going from this to what we see today. But those movements happen so slowly that you and I can't see them go. So, no, Brazilians or Chileans aren't out there feeling their continent inching westward. But the numbers don't lie. South America is moving, and apparently all it wants is to get as far away as possible from this massive underwater mountain range called the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. But what exactly is pushing the land toward the Pacific Ocean? It is the heat inside our planet. Way, way down beneath the ocean, there are cracks in the Earth's crust, and magma, super hot melted rock, rises up through those cracks. When that happens, the magma cools and hardens into solid rock. Over time, this process might build underwater mountains, like the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. And as more new crust forms, it begins to push the older crust out of the way. In the process, tectonic plates and the continents riding on top of them get pushed along. Now, on the other side of South America, over by the Pacific, there is the Nazca Plate. It's heavier and it's moving eastward. Since it is denser, it is sliding underneath the South American Plate. This entire process is called subduction, and it's happening at a rate of about 3 inches per year. By the way, the collision between these two plates is what's behind all those breathtaking volcanoes scattered throughout the Andes, and it's also making the continent move. So, if everything goes according to plan, projections show that South America will end up more centered in the Pacific Ocean in the future. But some models suggest something way crazier. Before we get into that, though, we need to clear something up. Why on earth isn't Africa following in South America's footsteps? I mean, shouldn't it be drifting west too? Well, not quite. Africa is doing its own thing because it sits on the African plate. So the Mid-Atlantic Ridge is located between those two continents, and just like it pushes the South American plate, it also pushes the African plate, but in the opposite direction. It's like this ridge is trying to split up two ex-besties, you know? But there's more. Africa is also being influenced by the East African Rift. That's one of those massive cracks we talked about earlier, but it's happening on land, which makes it extra dramatic. This is what's causing the continent to slowly split apart. It's a long story, but let's just say the rift is pulling Africa in more directions than South America ever had to deal with. Okay, now it is finally time to talk about that crazier thing that might happen to South America and everything around it in the future. Theory number 1. It could break away from North America. I know, super dramatic, but don't panic. We're talking hundreds of millions of years from now, and I won't be around. You see, both continents are moving in the same general direction, but at different speeds. The North American plate is cruising along at about 1 inch per year, while South America is moving a bit faster. So even though they're heading the same way, they are not keeping pace. Over time, as the Atlantic Ocean continues to widen and the Pacific keeps shrinking, all this tectonic movement could eventually pull the Americas apart. Theory number 2. Marine life could go through some major changes. Right now, the Americas act as kind of a giant wall between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Because of that, sea animals have evolved differently on each side. Take the green sea turtle, for example. The ones living in the Atlantic tend to be bigger and lighter in color. Meanwhile, their Pacific cousins are usually smaller and darker. But if, one day, there is no land blocking these two populations from mixing, they would end up with brand new migration routes, new nesting spots, and a lot more overlap in their territories. Now, multiply that scenario by hundreds of other species, and things could really get shaken up. We're talking about new interactions, unexpected competition, and maybe even the rise of entirely new species. Alright, theory number 3. America might meet Africa again. Right now, the Mid-Atlantic Ridge is busy creating a new seafloor, and because of that, the Atlantic Ocean is slowly getting wider. But in about 125 million years, scientists believe that process could come to a stop. Instead of the seafloor spreading apart, the ocean floor might start getting pulled under the continents. When that happens, the Atlantic will stop growing and start shrinking, and the water section between South America and Africa is likely to be the first part pulled beneath the land. That means the Americas and Africa could meet again. And when that happens, border countries could turn into super shaky places, with earthquakes happening all the time and brand new volcanoes popping up left and right. The eastern United States would no longer be known for the peaceful green slopes of the Appalachians, but for snow-covered giants that occasionally spew lava and ash, more like the Cascade Range out west. Countries would end up with totally new neighbors. Brazil might line up with Nigeria and Cameroon. Uruguay could be sitting right next to Angola. And Argentina might be sharing a border with South Africa. So if these two continents really do merge, how intense would that be? Well, for starters, this new supercontinent would instantly become the biggest one on Earth, about 1.5 times the size of Asia. And chances are, a brand new mountain range would form right where the continents meet, creating a natural border between nations. Being part of the same massive continent could make a lot of things way easier. For one, tourism could totally take off. People traveling between countries by land without needing pricey plane tickets could be a game changer. But it wouldn't stop there. Other types of economic activity could get a major boost too. Now on one side we have South America, which already produces and sells a wide variety of foods, from wheat to bananas, beef, cocoa, soybeans, hey, you name it. On the other side, there is Africa, exporting things like textiles and clothing. That alone would make them a super powerful bloc when it comes to trading raw goods. But can you name another important thing these two continents have in common? Yep, petroleum. Countries in South America, like Brazil, Venezuela, and Colombia, are major oil exporters. And over in Africa, you've got Nigeria, Algeria, and Libya doing the same. Now, can you see just how powerful that kind of union could be? Meanwhile, let's talk about animals. These two massive lands coming together could lead us to wild meetups, like a capybara sharing space with a Nile crocodile, or a sloth seeing a hyena from the top of a tree. This could even lead to new animal hybrids showing up, like a tabby crocodile or a sloth hyena. Okay, those weren't the cleverest names, and honestly, these animals wouldn't be able to mate or even wouldn't want to. But you get the point, right? It's not all positive, unfortunately. New species showing up could become predators, competitors, or even parasites to the native plants and animals. It would take a long time for things to settle into a new balance in those border regions. But honestly, no one really knows how long it would take. The only thing I do know is neither of us will be around to see it, which is okay.
This area might just be the most important spot in America right now, as it is worth over $1 trillion. There's something incredibly valuable hidden right here at Thacker Pass, and it is going to shake things up, not just in Nevada, but in the US economy and its global relations. The McDermott Caldera is a massive area, about 28 miles long by 22 miles wide, stretching across northern Nevada and southern Oregon. It's in Humboldt County, a quiet, rural place with just one main city that's going to change a lot in the next 5 to 10 years. That's because they found white gold there. We're talking about lithium. And to explain why this metal is so important, we need a scale. On one side, we place a chunk of lithium, and on the other, an apple. What do you think will happen? If both have the same volume, the scale is going to tip toward the apple. That's because lithium is super light. Its density is about 0.3 ounces per cubic inch, which makes it the lightest solid you can find at room temperature. Lithium is also extremely reactive. That means it combines with other elements very easily, and it can catch fire just as easily. Mix it with water, fire. Expose it to air, yep, fire again. But when you combine its lightness with its high reactivity, you get a material that's perfect for batteries. Like the one powering your smartphone, laptop, or even your electric car. Nevada's been hiding this treasure for about 16 million years. The McDermott Caldera used to be a volcanic hotspot, spewing molten rock and creating a huge lake filled with mineral-rich waters. Over time, that lake dried up, leaving behind thick layers of clay loaded with lithium. Right now, Thacker Pass Mine is sitting on one of the biggest untapped lithium reserves in the world, worth about $1.5 trillion. If everything goes as planned, they expect it to produce about 40,000 tons of high-quality lithium a year. And that's enough to make batteries for up to 800,000 electric cars. Like I mentioned earlier, this metal is the backbone of modern batteries. And with the world racing toward green energy, the demand for lithium is skyrocketing. Since 2020, its price has gone up more than 10 times, making it the most expensive battery metal in the world. That means it's way more expensive than magnesium, nickel, cobalt, and other materials used in rechargeable batteries. Right now, we're using about 1.16 million tons of lithium per year, and roughly 85% of it goes into making batteries, mostly for cars. Between 2030 and 2040, experts think we will need to double the money we're putting into production, from $94 billion to $188 billion. At the same time, investment in batteries will jump by over 200%, reaching $686 billion. Finally, by 2050, the demand for lithium is expected to be more than 10 times higher than what we're producing now. Sorry, I know that's a lot of numbers, but I just want to show how important Thacker Pass will be for the whole world. This mine is going to be key to keeping everything running. I mean, literally, since most of the future demand will be for things like cars, electric bikes, scooters, and renewable energy storage. Nevada could also be the epicenter of a global energy revolution, with the US aiming to cut pollution by 50% by 2030. A big part of that is replacing gas-powered vehicles with electric ones. And to make that happen, America is going to need a whole lot more lithium than it's producing right now. Nowadays, most of the metal used in the United States come from countries like Chile and Argentina. So if America wants to be a leader in this market, it really needs to invest more and more in projects like Thacker Pass. But there's another challenge. Finding lithium in a mine is one thing, but refining it is another story. Just like diamonds are carefully cut and shaped to bring out their sparkle and sold in rings and necklaces, something similar needs to be done with lithium. The raw material that comes from the mines has to be refined into a pure form that can actually be used in things like batteries. And China pretty much dominates this part of the market, and they're responsible for about 75% of global lithium-ion battery production. In other words, it doesn't matter if a country finds this powerful metal on its land, it will probably still need China to help refine it. So, the US is eager to strengthen its supply chain. In fact, they're so excited about this possibility that authorities have invested over $2 billion in loans into the Nevada project. Because of that, Thacker Pass could make the US a leader in lithium production worldwide. If their estimates are right, the McDermott caldera could hold nearly half of the world's known lithium reserves. It would almost double the reserves found in Bolivia's salt flats, for example, which used to hold the record for the world's largest deposit. This discovery is about to change Humboldt County for good. Those quiet streets surrounded by nature will never feel the same again. The mine will need about 2,000 workers who will probably move there from other cities. Those workers will need houses, hospitals, schools for their kids, and all the necessary services. Do you see how it's like a ripple effect? For every person hired to work on the project during construction, 6 more people will get hired in the state to support them. Thacker Pass is also going to have a huge impact on the economy, not just in Nevada, but all across the country. People expect the mine to be active for 35 years, and each year it's expected to generate over $2 billion. But here's the thing. In Thacker Pass, they'll be extracting lithium from clay, and this process has never been done on such a huge scale before. So it's kind of a hit or miss. But if it works, it could completely change the industry. Big question. Who's interested in all this? Well, we've got 3 big companies eyeing the lithium market in the US. First, there's ExxonMobil. The oil giant wants to start producing lithium by 2027, and they have plans to become the top supplier for electric vehicles by 2030. Then there's General Motors, the company behind big car brands like Chevrolet and Cadillac. They're so interested in this business that they agreed to pay $625 million for a 38% stake in Thacker Pass. And finally, Tesla. In 2023, they started building a factory in Texas to process lithium. It's all part of their plan to handle more of their supply chain themselves. Now that you know how important lithium is, you might be wondering, what if we run out? Well, that could happen, since it comes from mining and, just like gold, is a finite resource. But that doesn't mean we'd have to give up smartphones or electric cars. If we ever run out of this metal, we'd probably find new ways to produce batteries. In fact, some experts think thermal batteries could be the next big thing. They store extra energy from renewable resources like wind or solar power, which are very cheap. So they represent a new way of storing energy at a small fraction of the cost. Nowadays, they're primarily used for powering the production of steel, cement, and chemicals. Thermal batteries are also being used to heat and cool large buildings. However, more and more projects are focusing on bringing this technology into private spaces, like houses and apartments. Experts are optimistic that initiatives like these could make thermal batteries as well known as electric batteries, and they might soon become a regular part of our daily lives. There's a stretch of water that even the most experienced explorers fear. No matter what season you choose to cross it in, you risk meeting face-to-face with waves that can reach as tall as the Hollywood sign. I'm talking about the Drake Passage, the waterway connecting the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean, stretching from Cape Horn at South America's southernmost tip to Antarctica's South Shetland Islands. It's about as wide as the distance from London to Berlin and takes up to 48 hours to cross. Some sailors compare getting on the other side to going to the moon. That's how challenging it is. Even the man who discovered it, Sir Francis Drake, never sailed these waters because they seemed too dangerous to him and opted for a calmer, although longer, Strait of Magellan. The passage took the lives of around 20,000 sailors and over 800 ships. Tourists who want to see Antarctica cross the Drake Passage on a regular basis, although it's still often called the world's most terrifying ocean crossing. The Antarctic Peninsula, where travelers go, isn't really part of Antarctica itself. It sticks out and points towards South America like two fingers almost touching it. The water gets squeezed between these two land masses, making strong ocean currents. The passage is part of the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, the largest ocean current on Earth. The water rushes through the passage at a speed between 95 and 150 million cubic meters per second, which makes it rougher. And then there are winds that usually blow from west to east and are very strong between 40 and 60 degrees latitude. That's why those areas are called the Roaring Forties, Furious 50s, and Screaming 60s. Land slows down winds, which is why storms hitting Ireland and the UK get weaker as they move east. But Drake's latitude is the only place where winds can blow all around the Earth without being stopped by land, so they keep getting faster. These strong winds turn into huge waves that can hit ships really hard, normally around 13 to 16 feet tall. They're much higher than waves in the Atlantic. Drake Passage also has underwater mountains that you can't see. The huge current squeezes through this narrow passage and causes waves to crash against these mountains underwater. These internal waves create whirls that bring cold water up from the deep ocean. So it's not just rough on the surface, the water is wild all the way down. The first sailor managed to sail around Cape Horn and through the Drake Passage in 1616. It was a Dutch navigator, Willem Schouten, in 1616. But the most famous attempt to cross it was undertaken by Sir Ernest Henry Shackleton on his ship named Endurance. He and 27 of his men set off from South Georgia, aiming to reach Vassal Bay in Antarctica. But things didn't go as planned. On January 19, 1915, their ship got stuck in the ice. And by October, it began to sink. They camped on floating ice for 2 months before sailing lifeboats to a remote, icy place called Elephant Island. Shackleton and 5 men made a risky journey to South Georgia to get help. It took them 15 days to cross Drake Passage with hurricane winds. Finally, they arrived safely and organized a rescue for the rest of their crew. Scientists found the shipwreck of Endurance only in 2022, 10,000 feet below the water. In December of 2019, 6 fearless athletes decided to cross the Drake Passage by rowing a boat for the first time in history. It took them 12 days of non-stop rowing with a 90-minute rotation of rowers. They managed to do it, and it was probably the hardest possible way to cross the passage. The athletes mentioned it was cold, wet, and dirty, and the waves hit them like walls. The weather in the Drake Passage changes a lot, but ship captains can always see it coming and change their path. They will move the departure time to have a safety margin and not to get stuck in the middle of the passage in the worst possible conditions. Sometimes, the journey will be smooth and calm, and they call it Drake Lake. Other times, people on the ship will feel rough waves, which is called Drake Shake. Some experienced captains who often cross the passage say that the Drake Lake effect happens once in every 10 crossings. And they see the Drake Shake once or twice in every 10 journeys. A schooner or a kayak will probably not survive the journey among giant waves, but modest vessels and cruise ships have sturdy hulls and advanced stabilizing mechanisms. So, the journey isn't that dangerous anymore, but still, it's quite an adventure, especially if you're seasick. If you don't feel like risking it but want to travel from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean by water the fast way, the Panama Canal is waiting for you. People first started thinking about making a water path across Panama in the 16th century. Back then, a Spanish explorer found out that only a thin piece of land separated the two oceans. But it seemed impossible to build it because of the mountains and thick jungle, so the idea had to wait a couple of centuries. Finally, in 1880, France, led by the man who built the Suez Canal in Egypt, tried to make the canal. But the people who started the construction soon found out it was much harder than it looked on a map. The land in Panama was one of the toughest and most dangerous places to dig a big waterway. Workers had to literally move huge mountains in a jungle full of snakes, where it was really hot and rainy. During the wet season, heavy rain turned rivers into wild rapids and soaked the workers. Sometimes, they didn't see the sun for 2 weeks, and their clothes stayed wet all the time. Big rocks were falling, and tiny mosquitoes that carried malaria made people very sick. And then, an earthquake happened on top of everything. They were losing thousands of people. That's why France decided to abandon the project after 7 years. Then, the United States bought the French assets in the Canal Zone and finished it by 1914. It cost the US around $375 million. The 50-mile-long passage of water saves ships traveling between New York and San Francisco 7,872 miles. Around 14,000 ships use it every year and pay around $1.8 million in tolls. So it looks like it all paid off. Another challenging waterway in this part of the world is the Amazon River. It's around 4,300 miles long and flows through 3 countries with over 30 million people living in its basin. But there isn't a single bridge across it. The river has many marshes and soft soils, so engineers would need to build very long bridges and very deep foundations, which costs a lot of money. Building bridges over deep water is tough, but in other places in the world, engineers can use things like floating platforms to help. The river's path and water levels change a lot during the year. During the dry season from June to November, the river is usually 2 to 6 miles wide. But in the wet season from December to April, the river can become as wide as 30 miles. And the water level can rise by 50 feet. That's why they can't build floating bridges or pontoons. The riverbanks are made of soft dirt that moves and erodes with the seasons, and it makes things even harder. It would have to be an absolutely unique project to overcome all these challenges. Luckily, there's no pressing need for a bridge across the Amazon right now. The river mostly goes through areas that are sparsely populated, so there aren't so many major roads to be connected by bridges.
Some mistakes have the power to change the course of history. One such story has to do with an old, boring key that could have saved the Titanic from its infamous demise. The key belonged to the crow's nest locker that housed binoculars, which could have helped the lookouts spot the iceberg sooner. There's more. The key wasn't even on board the ship when it set sail. The second officer took it with him when he was taken off the ship at the last minute. As the story goes, the officer forgot to hand the key over to his replacement in his hurry to disembark. So, when the lookouts were in desperate need of binoculars, they were out of luck. One of the lookouts, named Fred Fleet, even testified that if they had had binoculars, they would have spotted the iceberg in time to avoid it. And when asked how much sooner, Fleet replied, "Enough to get out of the way." In 2015, some auctioneers got their hands on Blair's key and presented it as one of the most important artifacts from the Titanic. They truly believed it could have saved the ship. Blair kept the key as a souvenir and passed it down to his daughter, Nancy. At one point, it was up for auction with a price tag of over $80,000. Blair himself was quite the hero, it seems. A year after the Titanic disaster, he was awarded a gallantry medal for saving a crewman who had fallen overboard while he had been on board the liner Majestic. He may have forgotten a key, but he sure didn't forget to be a hero when it counted. This next story is both funny and tragic. It's about NASA's lost $125 million Mars Climate Orbiter. The spacecraft engineers failed to convert from English to metric measurements before the craft was launched, and as a result, they lost it. The navigation team at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory used the metric system of millimeters and meters, while Lockheed Martin Astronautics in Denver used the English system of inches, feet, and pounds. JPL engineers mistook acceleration readings measured in English units of pound-seconds for a metric measure of force called Newton-seconds. What's worse is that none of JPL's quality control procedures caught the error in the 9 months it took the spacecraft to make its 461 million mile flight to Mars. That's a long time to be lost in translation, don't you think? The miscalculations were enough to throw the spacecraft so far off track that it flew too deeply into the Martian atmosphere and was destroyed when it entered its initial orbit around Mars. It's embarrassing to lose a spacecraft to such a simple math error. And it's hard to think of another example of such a large loss due to English versus metric confusion. Ever heard about the mathematical mistake that led to the discovery of the New World? Spoiler alert, it involves a guy named Christopher Columbus and a really big globe. Back in 1492, Columbus set sail from Spain with a mission to find a new trade route to Asia. He was convinced that he was less than 3,000 miles away from Japan, and just a bit more sailing would get him to the Indies with all their tasty spices. The only problem was that Columbus was a bit off in his calculations, like way off. He made a mistake in estimating the size of the globe, which led him to believe that Earth was far smaller than it actually is. Now I know what you're thinking. Wasn't Columbus afraid that he would fall off the edge of the world? Contrary to popular myth, Columbus and his crew knew the Earth was a globe, just like the ancient Greeks did 2 millennia earlier. They weren't worried about falling off the edge, but rather about the size of the ocean they planned on crossing. And to make matters worse, Columbus had no idea that an unknown landmass existed between Spain and Asia. After weeks at sea, Columbus finally reached the Caribbean. He believed that he had landed on the outskirts of Asia, and so named the islands the West Indies. He went on to explore the Caribbean and the northern coast of South America. But here's where things get really interesting. Even though Columbus insisted until his last day that he had reached Asia, another Italian explorer named Amerigo Vespucci mapped the eastern shore of South America down to Brazil and proved conclusively that Columbus had actually discovered a whole new world. A German mapmaker saw Amerigo's maps and labeled the new landmass America after him. And since his maps were super popular at the time, the name stuck. One man named Alexander Fleming stumbled upon one of the most significant medical discoveries of all time by accident. At one point in his career, Fleming observed the demise of many people from uncontrollable infections. Antiseptics were used to fight this, but they often did more harm than good. In 1922, while he had a cold himself, Fleming transferred some of his, nasal discharge to a petri dish and left it on his cluttered desk. When he finally examined it weeks later, he found that an enzyme had some antimicrobial properties. It wasn't until 1928, when Fleming left an uncovered petri dish next to an open window, that he stumbled upon the discovery that would change the world. The dish became contaminated with fungus spores. And when he examined them under the microscope, Fleming discovered that the bacteria near the fungus were dying. He managed to isolate the fungus and found that it was effective against numerous things that cause diseases. And thus, penicillin was discovered. As Fleming himself put it, "I did not discover penicillin. Nature did that. I only discovered it by accident." Talk about a lucky break. In the early 1520s, the east coast of the United States of America was a big mystery waiting to be solved. The Spanish found Florida, and the English and Portuguese found Newfoundland, but the area in between was like a blank spot on the map. France decided to take action and sent an expedition to explore the area. They chose a guy called Giovanni da Verrazzano to lead the trip. For this expedition, he got 4 ships. Unfortunately, 2 of them were shipwrecked. and a third one went home after doing some other business on the Spanish coast. Only the flagship, La Dauphine, crossed the Atlantic with Verrazano and his 50-man crew. Verrazano set sail from Madeira and landed at Cape Fear. From there, he sailed south, but got a little scared of running into the Spanish, so he returned somewhere north of Charleston. He anchored not far from his original landing spot, but unlike other explorers, he preferred to anchor well out at sea. He did send a boat to the shore, and he met the natives. They were described as wearing just some animal skins covering their bodies and garlands of bird feathers. As Verrazano sailed along the coast, he reached the outer banks of North Carolina. He thought that the waters he discovered were those of the Pacific. In reality, what he'd stumbled upon was the Pamlico Sound. He thought that North America was just a long, extremely narrow strip of land. This mistake led mapmakers to show North America as almost completely divided in two. Moving on, Verrazano reached a beautiful place that he called Arcadia, probably Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. Sailing further north, he missed the entrances to Chesapeake and Delaware Bays because he kept quite far from the coast until New Jersey. Then, the moment we've all been waiting for, Verrazano discovered New York Harbor, and he anchored in the Narrows. Later, it was named after him, and now it is spanned by the Verrazano Narrows Bridge. Once Verrazano's sea appeared on the map, it became widely accepted and impacted loads of future explorers. For example, Henry Hudson went looking for a passage to the Pacific in the middle latitudes of the continent. But, as it turns out, the Englishman never did find the Pacific Ocean anywhere near Virginia. And the cartographic myth eventually faded away. It's funny to think about how a mistaken belief could have such an impact on history.
So look at this narrow passage between the north of Morocco and the southern part of the Spanish region. It's called the Strait of Gibraltar. There are only 8 miles between the two continents, but for some reason, there's no bridge, despite people having been dreaming for centuries about connecting these two regions. There are places in the world where a bridge over water stretches for a much greater distance. For example, the Lake Pontchartrain Causeway near New Orleans, Louisiana, goes for 24 miles, which is 3 times the length of the hypothetical bridge between Africa and Europe. That's listed in the Guinness Book of World Records as the longest continuous bridge passing over water. It consists of 2 parallel bridges and connects the urban area of New Orleans with small settlements in the north of Lake Pontchartrain. 9,000 concrete piles hold more than 1,000 decks above the water. This large-scale structure was built in the middle of the 20th century. It only took 14 months from the start of construction to its completion. American engineers created a unique technology for attaching concrete piles to the base of the bridge, and this bridge is still functioning. So, what's the problem with building a shorter bridge to connect Africa and Europe? Let's first find out the value of the 8-mile bridge that could connect 2 continents and the reason why everyone is talking about it. In fact, the value of such a bridge would be enormous. Diamonds, oil, minerals. Africa is full of valuable materials, and Europe is happy to buy these things. This theoretical bridge could allow people to transport things for trade quickly and comfortably. But now, the exchange of goods between Africa and Europe is only possible thanks to airplanes and cargo ships, and airplanes are extremely expensive because of hefty fuel price tags. In addition, air travel is often delayed because of bad weather. There are long customs procedures and transportation from the airport to the destination. Ships can also be a problem. The narrow area of the Mediterranean Sea, where the 2 continents are closest to each other, is a dangerous place because of storms and strong currents. The transportation of your diamonds is highly dependent on weather conditions. The second advantage of such a bridge would be the creation of tens of thousands of jobs. People from Europe and Africa would build hotels, ports, parks, and even small towns for each other. The coastal parts of both continents would become a new economic center. And just imagine how much investment those places would attract. Europe and Africa would be much closer than ever before. You could drive from a small Spanish town to a safari park in northern Morocco, buy Moroccan tea, get some argan oil, and go home for the evening. Or you could take a high-speed train across the beautiful Mediterranean Sea. People would open hundreds of restaurants, amusement parks, shopping malls, and a museum next to this bridge. But, unfortunately, it's impossible to build such a bridge, at least at the moment. And here's why. The main problem is the Strait of Gibraltar itself, because of its strong currents and seismic activity. How can you start large-scale construction if, in a couple of days, an underwater earthquake can trigger giant waves and take all the ships underwater? Even if you build a bridge, rapid streams of water that constantly change direction can shake the entire structure and tear the connecting parts of the construction. The bridge over the Strait of Gibraltar must have a strong, sturdy system that will withstand seismic activity. Huge resources are required to create such a complex structure. Despite the dangerous passage between the two continents, it remains one of the busiest points in the world. It's the only place on the planet connecting the Mediterranean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. About 300 ships pass through this area every day. Not only merchant ships, but also fishing vessels and tourist boats. There are not so many places in the world where you can watch whales coming out of the water. Not only people, but also marine creatures often visit this passage because of the peculiarities of the sea currents. But we'll talk about that later. Another problem is the depth of the strait. In simple words, any bridge over the water is built on long metal piles. Builders and engineers stick piles into the seabed and use them as a holding base for the whole construction. But installing such piles firmly enough is a difficult task because of the uneven seabed. The seabed has a unique geological landscape, irregularities, and different densities of the Earth's rock. There are also reefs, rocks, and pits. Any seabed requires extensive geological studies before piles are installed. However, the bottom of the Strait of Gibraltar is especially difficult because of its depth, almost 3,000 feet. It's one of the deepest straits in the whole world. Just imagine, you'll need the height of 10 Statues of Liberty to reach the surface of the water from the bottom of the strait. What kind of pile should be used there to hold the entire bridge? Most likely, one pile will have to consist of several parts connected into one large metal rod. And don't forget about seismic activity. Let's say you've installed perfectly strong piles, but the next day an earthquake occurs and destroys the entire structure. And a strong current is carrying fortifications all over the Mediterranean Sea. The next problem is probably the most important one, because it concerns marine life. The Strait of Gibraltar has a high salt content. This natural element makes water heavier and makes it descend to the bottom of the deep Mediterranean basin. Then, this salt water pushes up cold water from the seabed into the Atlantic Ocean. These changes in water density, as well as fast currents, create sea vortices and turbulence. It's like a raging cauldron of cold water that raises a lot of nutrients to the surface. The hollows and hills of the Strait of Gibraltar are filled with different substances and sunlight, and this creates ideal conditions for the formation of phytoplankton. Whales, dolphins, and other marine creatures adore this delicacy. That's why you can see about 7 species of whales and dolphins in this place. What might happen to phytoplankton after the start of global construction? Carbon dioxide, crushed rock, tons of dust and ashes, falling building materials. All of this could significantly pollute the environment. Without phytoplankton, many fish would go extinct. Without fish, thousands of fishers wouldn't be able to get food and earn money. But even if the bridge was built, cars and trains would continue to pollute the air and water. This disruption of the delicate balance in this narrow strait can lead to larger-scale environmental disasters. Dolphins and whales may leave to look for food elsewhere, and thus take resources from other marine inhabitants. Like falling dominoes, one problem can follow another. And all this because of one bridge. In 2007, the Spanish Ministry of Environmental Protection introduced speed limits for all ships sailing through the strait in order to not disrupt the delicate balance of nature. At the beginning of the 20th century, a French engineer proposed a project of a bridge, but it was rejected because it was too complicated and costly. People also tried to develop a 23-mile-long tunnel, but this project also faced financial and technical difficulties. People are still dreaming of a bridge over the Strait of Gibraltar. Perhaps, in the future, when we develop cooler technologies, we'll be able to build this thing. Oh, by the way, there hasn't always been water between these two regions. In the distant past, the two continents were connected. The entire Mediterranean Sea is the remains of the Tethys Sea that existed before the era of dinosaurs. Then the African and Indian plates collided with the Eurasian one, and the Tethys Sea completely disappeared. In its place, a land bridge was formed that separated the Mediterranean Sea from the ocean. Without access to water, the sea dried up about 6 million years ago. But then, when the bridge came down, the water began to fill the dried-up pool. For tens of thousands of years, the narrow plate sank lower and lower, and the Mediterranean Sea eventually got its current water levels. A tsunami hitting major cities on or near the Mediterranean Sea and in the northeastern part of the Atlantic Ocean is not a matter of if, but when. It is scary and surreal to think that places like Cannes or Barcelona could suddenly get slammed by a huge wave. But the fact is, European coastlines are in active tectonic areas. Only about 10% of all tsunamis worldwide happen in the Mediterranean, and there have been at least 290 tsunamis in this area since 1600 before Common Era. Despite the relatively low number, this phenomenon has caused numerous devastating disasters throughout Europe's history. Back in 1755, an estimated 8.5 magnitude earthquake with an epicenter southwest of Cape St. Vincent triggered a tsunami that destroyed most of Lisbon, the capital of Portugal. About 40 minutes after the earthquake, this massive wave just slammed into the harbor in downtown, racing up the Tagus River. The phenomenon was so fast that several people on horseback had to gallop to higher ground to avoid getting carried away. And this was just the beginning of a nightmare, with two more terrifying waves hitting Lisbon right after. A disaster like this is similar to what we see in the Pacific Ocean several times a century, but in the Atlantic, it's very rare. This type of major tsunami is expected to happen every 3 to 5 centuries, but now it could happen tomorrow. Marseille in France, Chipion in Spain, and other cities are on the list of important locations that could be flooded soon, with a roughly 100% chance of being hit by a tsunami in the next 30 years. Statistics show that the wave will probably be more than 3 feet high. I know, it doesn't sound like much, especially since when we think about tsunamis, we imagine terrifyingly tall waves, like the one that hit Lituya Bay in Alaska. In that case, the wave was over 1,700 feet tall. But we must remember that even waves only 19 inches high can be dangerous to swimmers. Because it's not the height of the tsunami that matters, but also the flow and movement of the water. Not to mention the flooding, which can damage beaches, harbors, and streets. If the coastline has a small harbor and the waterfront is exceptionally low, like Cannes, this natural disaster might be much more dangerous. Tsunamis around 6 feet high can lift cars off the ground, while smaller waves can create walls of water traveling at 40 miles per hour. Plus, there are these smaller events that might not wreck everything, but still can cost a ton of money. For example, large sandbars that move around on the ocean floor, like sand dunes shifting in deserts. They can mess up pipelines or deep-sea cables for internet and communications, and that ends up costing businesses and governments millions of dollars. That's why organizations like UNESCO are worried about the possibility of a dangerous tsunami hitting Europe soon. So they're doing everything they can to prevent apocalyptic scenarios, like what happened in 2004 when an earthquake off the coast of Sumatra, Indonesia, caused waves over 100 feet high in coastal communities, resulting in over 200,000 lives lost. And let's not forget about 2011, when an earthquake off the coast of Tohoku, Japan, triggered a tsunami that reached about 6 miles inland and caused a major nuclear accident at a power station along the coast. Over 16,000 people lost their lives in that tragedy, and the event resulted in billions of dollars in infrastructure damage. These disasters were huge wake-up calls, and we've come a long way since 2004. We're much safer today, largely because the tsunami warning system is highly effective at quickly detecting this dangerous situation. Unlike many other natural phenomena, a tsunami can be anticipated. We may only have a few minutes to act, but if we all know what to do, many lives can be saved. And in most parts of the world, sirens are commonly used to alert people to tsunamis. To sound the siren as early as possible, initial tsunami alerts usually rely only on seismic data. First, specialists receive information about an earthquake. Seismic waves travel about 100 times faster than tsunamis, so they have enough time to analyze the data and see if the earthquake might have generated a tsunami and whether they should issue an initial tsunami alert. At U.S. warning centers, for example, scientists typically issue initial alerts within 5 minutes of an earthquake. If a tsunami is suspected, these alerts may also include information about wave arrival times, recommended actions, and potential impacts. But sounding the alarm is not enough. To save lives, coastal communities also need to be trained to respond fast and in the best way possible. That's why UNESCO produced this program called Tsunami Ready, aiming to train people living in coastal areas at risk on how to act in case of a tsunami event by the year 2030. The idea is to help communities stay safe by teaching them how to protect their livelihoods and safeguard their homes. Being recognized as tsunami ready by UNESCO doesn't mean a community is tsunami proof, of course. It's more like a recognition that they have adopted all possible measures to mitigate tsunami risks. So authorities are helping communities to prepare themselves by installing evacuation signs, establishing security procedures, and creating plans to warn tourists. Like Spain, which distributed tsunami warning signs along the entire coastline, as well as signs showing evacuation routes to higher ground. And Spain better be prepared. I mean, only 7 tsunamis have hit the country since the year 365, so it's difficult to predict the effects of such an event. But they could be devastating, considering that Spanish coastal areas are so economically important. There's also a danger zone in the Averroes Fault, beneath the Barents Sea. If an earthquake happens at this point, people will have only 21 minutes to escape a tsunami. UNESCO has also established 12 tsunami warning centers, which cover Europe as well. This initiative involves 5 centers located in the Mediterranean and Northeast Atlantic regions. These centers can save thousands of lives because they monitor ocean disturbances 24/7. Then, after analyzing the threat, they send out messages based on the event's potential to cause a tsunami. The intensity scale ranges from no effect to completely devastating. And by that, they understand that nearly all brick buildings could be demolished by waves, and even the most reinforced concrete structures could suffer heavy damage. Now, so far, we have mostly talked about tsunamis caused by earthquakes along converging tectonic plate boundaries. In fact, earthquakes have accounted for over 80% of tsunamis since 1900. But tsunamis can also result from landslides, volcanic eruptions, and even meteorite impacts. Experts are also worried that with the current changes in climate, we might see more of meteotsunamis popping up in the Mediterranean. These ones are triggered by freaky weather conditions and can mess with any coastline that's got a shallow seafloor. They might not be as huge or famous as the earthquakes ones, but they can still cause significant property damage and put people in danger. For instance, in 2006, a meteotsunami struck the harbor of Ciutadella on the Spanish island of Menorca. Yachts were tossed into each other and later stranded on the harbor floor as the water receded, resulting in tens of millions of euros in damage. Unfortunately, meteotsunamis in the Mediterranean tend to be stronger during summer, so if you're planning to spend your vacation in Europe, stay alert for any signs of dangerous waves. If you suddenly encounter a tsunami moving in your direction, remember this is the time to react. Move to higher ground as far inland as possible. Pay special attention to any emergency alerts and information, and follow the guidance of local authorities. Most importantly, do not wait around taking photos. Leave the area as soon as you notice any signs of this danger event or if you hear an official tsunami warning. Hey, stay safe. So the Sahara Desert is so big that it covers 8% of the world's territory. It's bigger than the USA or China. Surprisingly, the Sahara is not the largest desert in the world. It is the third largest, behind Antarctica and the Arctic. But it is definitely the hottest one. Temperatures there reach 136 degrees Fahrenheit. This place has some of the most incredible sand dunes you've ever seen, towering up to 1,476 feet. But here's the kicker. There's a real risk that these dunes might continue to spread until they cover the entire world. Surprisingly, the influence of the Sahara Desert extends far beyond its borders. Its dust, carried by powerful winds, makes its way to the UK and across the European continent, particularly in winter. This dust, settling on the ground where it rains, is a familiar sight to those in the UK, often leaving a red residue on cars. This connection between the Sahara, England, and Europe serves as a stark reminder of the global reach of environmental phenomena. You might think this is not a big deal, but it could turn Europe into a desert, leaving its soil infertile and Europeans with no food. Soil is a fundamental aspect of human existence, just as crucial as clean water and air. Without it, we're left with nothing but a bleak and barren landscape. The Sahara Desert has already made its jump across the Mediterranean Sea, which is concerning and could change the landscape forever. 1/5 of Spain has already turned into a desert. The next victim is Italy, which also faces the problem of desertification. In fact, almost all European countries have the same issue. According to an expert, the land that has not changed for nearly 2,000 years will become mostly rock, and people living on this land will be gone. 60% of the soil in Moldova is gone, and the problem has expanded beyond the Black Sea. It has reached China and Mongolia, thousands of miles away from the Sahara Desert. All of this causes losses of $4 billion a year. The threat is so significant that even the UN has gathered the necessary resources to solve the problem as soon as possible. Italy is sending help to Africa to stop the Sahara Desert from expanding. If this process does not stop in the next 10 years, millions will be forced to leave their homes. The Sahara Desert is growing for approximately 30 miles per decade. You do the math and see how long it will take to cover Europe. Since 1920, the Sahara has expanded by around 10%. But not all hope is lost because more than 172 countries have joined to put a stop to the desertification of the world. The World Food Program is a project that aims to help bring back green land that was once present in the Sahara. When they told people who called the Sahara home what they were about to do, the latter basically laughed in their faces and said it was impossible. But when you have a specific goal in mind, the impossible becomes possible. If we traveled back around 5,000 years into the past, we would see a beautiful forest with lush green trees and grass. Africa's climate has been changing for 21,000 years, from fantastic greenery to uninhabitable deserts. This has to do with Earth's rotation and the monsoons that bring water to this dry continent. But with the help of scientists and some clever tricks, we can bring the greenery back and stop the Sahara in its tracks. The Senegal River serves as a border between the Sahara Desert, Senegal City, and Mauritania. When you look at this area from space, you'll see how the desert is expanding to Senegal because the vegetation along the riverbank is almost non-existent. Forests can serve as a barrier, stopping the sand from getting blown away and the desert from expanding. An effort to create a great green wall is being made, and how they do it is actually quite impressive. Nothing has been growing in the currently restored area for more than 40 years, making locals find other places to call home. People were thrilled when they saw that the land could be restored. They're very committed and learn to work with the soil and grow food. At the same moment, more than 30,000 hectares have been restored and transformed into lush greenery. The Sahel region is the starting point of desertification, and it is crucial to establish a green wall in that area first. To make this wall is not rocket science, since it only takes a few simple steps. The ground there is baked by the sun and as hard as a block of concrete. If you've ever poured water on concrete, you know that it just flows away. It doesn't stay in one place. So they had to create water-retaining half-moons that would hold the water and make it available to plants. When you learn about how these half-moons work, you might say, how did they not think of that sooner? Actually, this technique is ancient, and it was once implemented in Sahel, but it was lost over time. When the rain falls, the water is collected into the half-moons that are positioned a bit lower than the ground below contour lines. There is also a kind of bank at the end of the shape that prevents water from overflowing. And in the middle, there are plants that are happy because they have plenty of water to thrive. Also, it's essential to grow native plants that are kind of used to harsh conditions, like sorghum and millet. These plants have been surviving there for thousands of years and produce a good amount of biomass, which means the land can be rehabilitated faster and people will have food sooner. The water that will enter the half-moons won't be lost. It will penetrate the ground and top off underground waters. This will ensure the ground that H2O will never run out and that future generations will have usable aqua. This brilliant planting technique is not limited to half-moons. People also create lines and plant various vegetables, such as tomatoes. Next, there are places only for trees, like lemons or oranges. After a long hot day, nothing is better than a freshly made cold lemonade. The trees will also protect the soil, and with some luck, there will be a new forest in the Sahara Desert. The goal is to copy the forest dynamic. Start with small plants and gradually expand to bigger plants that are more useful than the tiny ones. They are aiming to plant more than 10,000 trees. Right now, many people are leaving the Sahara after the rainy season, going to cities or leaving Africa altogether. At this time of year, villages are like ghost towns. Only animals can be found there. Most people are gone. I mean, who would blame them? Nobody wants to live in the sand where nothing grows. Luckily, with all this new, old technology being developed, many people are slowly but surely returning to their land and starting to work in agriculture. The best thing is that there are no brutal winters, so plants grow 12 months a year, and people can always have food. People are becoming more social because now everybody stays in their villages and doesn't travel much. If this project works out, Africa will be saved, and the world won't turn into a giant desert. That's it for today. So hey, if you pacified your curiosity, then give the video a like and share it with your friends. Or if you want more, just click on these videos and stay on the bright side.